Just a paperwork mix-up, she assured me as my deportation loomed. But the US's investigation revealed she'd been filing false reports about my employment for months. The email trail showed her planning to hire her niece for my position. When ICE raided my apartment, at 5:47 a.m., they broke down my door. 6 ICE agents in tactical gear, weapons drawn, screaming commands in English that my terror-frozen brain couldn't process. I was on the floor in my pajamas, hands zip-tied behind my back, when one of them finally said the words that made everything clear. "You're under arrest for visa fraud and illegal employment." My name is Priya Sharma, and 6 months ago, I was living my American dream, a senior software engineer at a Fortune 500 company, engaged to the love of my life, building the future I'd worked so hard to achieve. Today, I'm fighting deportation because my boss, Miranda Whitfield, decided her niece deserved my job more than I did. It started subtly, the way workplace sabotage always does. Miranda had been my manager for 2 years, all smiles and mentorship, until her niece Jessica graduated from coding bootcamp. Suddenly, my performance reviews contained concerns that had never been voiced before. My code was lacking innovation. My communication needed cultural adjustment. My work ethic was different from team expectations. "Don't worry about it," Miranda assured me during one of our one-on-ones. "Just minor areas for growth. Your visa renewal should be fine." I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She'd hired me straight from my master's program, sponsored my H-1B visa, written glowing recommendations. She knew my entire life depended on that job, not just my career, but my legal right to exist in the country I'd called home for 7 years. The first real sign of trouble came when HR called me in February. Linda from HR looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers on her desk. "Priya, we've received some concerning reports about your employment status," she began. "There seem to be discrepancies in your timesheets." Discrepancies? I pulled up my meticulously kept records on my phone. I log everything. Every hour, every project. "That's the issue. Your manager's reports to USCIS show different hours. Significantly different. Like part-time hours when you've been working full-time." My blood ran cold. H-1B visas require full-time employment. If USCIS thought I was working part-time, it would invalidate my status. "This has to be a mistake," I said. "Miranda knows I work 50 to 60 hours a week. She assigns the projects herself." Linda frowned. "I'll look into it. For now, just keep detailed records of everything." I started documenting obsessively. Screenshots of emails, photos of myself at my desk with timestamps, code commit logs showing my work hours. I even started recording meetings with Miranda, legal in our one-party consent state, though it felt like betrayal. The second sign came in March when my visa renewal was denied. Insufficient evidence of specialized employment, the denial letter read. Employer failed to demonstrate need for foreign worker in this position. I stormed into Miranda's office, denial letter trembling in my hand. She was training Jessica on our code base, my code base, the system I'd architected from scratch. "Oh, Priya." She minimized her screen quickly. "What's wrong?" "My visa was denied. They say you didn't provide proper documentation." Her face was a masterpiece of concern. "That can't be right. I filed everything myself to make sure it was perfect. Must be a processing error. These government agencies, you know how they are." "Miranda, I could be deported." "Don't be dramatic. We'll file an appeal." "Jessica, why don't you grab us some coffee? Priya and I need to sort this out." Jessica -22, blonde, fresh out of boot camp, gave me a sympathetic look that felt rehearsed. "Of course, Aunt Miranda." "Hi, Priya. I've heard so much about your work. It's incredible what you've built here." After she left, Miranda pulled up emails on her computer. "See, I sent everything to USCIS. Letter of support, your job description, salary information. It's all here." It looked legitimate, but something nagged at me, a detail I wouldn't understand until later. The job description she'd sent described a junior developer role, not the senior architect position I actually held. The salary was listed as $45,000, not the $120,000 I earned. Every detail crafted to make it seem like my job could be filled by any entry-level American worker. "We'll fix this," Miranda promised. "Just keep working normally while we sort it out." But normally became increasingly impossible. My access to critical systems was revoked pending visa status clarification. My team lead responsibilities were temporarily reassigned to Jessica for training purposes. My desk was moved to a corner cube because Jessica needed to be closer to Miranda for mentorship. I hired an immigration lawyer with my savings. Raj Patel was expensive but came highly recommended. When he reviewed my case, his expression grew increasingly grim. Priya, these documents your employer submitted, they're not just wrong. They're deliberately falsified. Your actual job description, the one in your original visa application, has been completely rewritten. And these timesheet reports, they show you working 20 hours a week for the past 6 months. But I work twice that. I believe you, but USCIS goes by what the employer reports. And your employer is telling them you're a part-time junior developer making barely above minimum wage. Why would Miranda do this? Raj pulled up LinkedIn on his laptop. Jessica Whitfield. Started at your company 2 months ago as senior software architect. That's your title, isn't it? The pieces clicked. Every late-night project Miranda had me training Jessica on. Every system architecture document she had me share for backup purposes. Every proprietary algorithm I developed that Jessica was now maintaining. She's replacing you with her niece, I whispered. While making it look like you're the one committing visa fraud, Raj added. If USCIS thinks you've been lying about your employment, you're not just looking at deportation. You're looking at a permanent ban from re-entering the U.S. The next weeks were a nightmare of legal filings, evidence gathering, and steadily escalating hostility at work. Miranda became openly cold, criticizing my work in public, assigning me menial tasks, scheduling important meetings when she knew I had lawyer appointments. Maybe you should consider opportunities back home, she suggested during one particularly cruel performance review. This visa situation is clearly affecting your work quality. My work quality is fine, I shot back. It's good enough for Jessica to take credit for it. Her mask slipped. Jessica is a talented developer who doesn't require expensive visa sponsorship. She's also family, which means she's loyal. Unlike some people who forget who gave them their chance. I recorded that conversation. Thank God I recorded it. The USCIS investigation began after Raj filed our complaint. What they found was damning. Miranda hadn't just falsified my recent reports. She'd been laying groundwork for months. Emails to HR about my performance issues that were never sent to me. Backdated documentation suggesting I'd been counseled for problems that never existed. Time cards edited retroactively to show me working fewer hours. But Miranda had made one crucial mistake. She used her company email to coordinate with Jessica. Mom says you're ready to take over the neural network project, one email read. Priya won't be an issue much longer. Can't wait to officially start. Jessica had replied. Aunt Miranda says I can have the corner office once visa issues resolve. The FBI's cybercrime division got involved when they discovered Miranda had accessed my personal USCIS account using credentials she'd obtained when helping with my initial visa application. She'd been monitoring my status, even submitting false documents in my name to make it look like I was complicit in the fraud. The raid on my apartment happened before the investigation concluded. Someone, we later learned it was Miranda, had reported me as an illegal immigrant engaged in unauthorized employment. ICE doesn't wait for investigations. They act on tips, sort out truth later. Those 20 minutes on my apartment floor, surrounded by armed agents, were the longest of my life. My fiancé James arrived as they were loading me into the van. She's here legally, he shouted, showing them our meticulously organized visa documentation. This is a mistake. Tell it to the judge, one agent replied, slamming the van door. I spent 72 hours in detention before Raj could get me released. 72 hours in a concrete cell, wearing a uniform that marked me as criminal, listening to the sobs of others caught in a system's web. My cellmate was a grandmother who'd been here 30 years, grabbed in a workplace raid because her green card renewal was delayed. They don't see us as people, she told me, just problems to be solved by removal. When I finally got out, the real bombshell waited. The USCIS investigation had uncovered everything. Miranda had done this before, to 2 other H-1B holders in the past 5 years. Each time, a family member had mysteriously become qualified for the job just as the visa holder's status was sabotaged. Each time, She portrayed herself as the helpful manager trying to navigate unfortunate immigration issues. Her previous victims had been deported before they could fight back. I was the first to lawyer up, the first to document, the first to fight. The FBI arrested Miranda at the office. I wasn't there. She banned me from the premises for security reasons, but coworkers sent videos. Miranda in handcuffs, screaming about ungrateful foreigners stealing American jobs. Jessica crying, insisting she hadn't known, that she just wanted to work with her aunt. The investigation revealed the full scope. Miranda had taken kickbacks from Jessica's father, her brother, for getting his daughter a six-figure job she wasn't qualified for. They planned to do the same for another nephew the following year, targeting my Indian colleague who was also on an H-1B. It's not illegal to hire family, Miranda's lawyer argued at her trial. And it's not illegal to report genuine concerns about an employee's performance. But the prosecutor had receipts. Every falsified document, every backdated email, every fraudulent USCIS filing. Most damning was the recording I'd made of Miranda admitting Jessica was family and that I should leave the country. This wasn't nepotism, the prosecutor said. This was a deliberate campaign to destroy illegal immigrants' life for personal gain. Ms. Whitfield weaponized the immigration system, knowing that any irregularity could result in deportation. She used her position of power to commit fraud, identity theft, and immigration violations. Miranda was convicted on 12 counts, including visa fraud, identity theft, and making false statements to federal agents. She got 8 years in federal prison. Her brother was convicted as an accomplice. Jessica, who cooperated with authorities and genuinely seemed horrified when she learned the full truth, got probation and community service. But my victory in court didn't immediately solve my problems. My visa status was in limbo. The company, terrified of liability, had terminated me without prejudice during the investigation. No job meant no valid visa status, even though the fraud wasn't my fault. The system doesn't care about fairness, Raj explained. You're out of status. Period. I had to leave. After 7 years, an engagement, a career, a life built carefully within every legal boundary, I had to go back to India and reapply from scratch. The departure was voluntary, better than deportation, which would have carried a 10-year ban. But it felt like exile. James offered to marry me immediately, to file for a spouse visa, but I was too proud, too hurt, too afraid that even marriage would be seen as fraud after everything Miranda had put in my file. I need to do this right, I told him at the airport. I need to come back on my own terms, not running from her lies. 6 months. That's how long it took to clean up Miranda's mess, to get new visa approval, to find a company willing to sponsor me despite the complications in my history. 6 months of 3 a.m. video calls with James, of restarting my career in Bangalore, of fighting to prove I deserved what I'd already earned. The day I returned to the U.S., legally, with a visa that Miranda couldn't touch from prison, felt like victory. The tech company that hired me had followed my case, horrified that such talent could be lost to bureaucratic sabotage. They offered me a senior architect position with a clear path to green card sponsorship. We value engineers, not their birthplace, my new manager, David, said during orientation. What happened to you was unconscionable. It won't happen here. I married James 6 months later. Not for papers, my visa was secure, but because surviving Miranda's sabotage had taught us both that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Why wait to build the life we wanted? At the wedding, my former colleague Emmett gave a toast. He'd been Miranda's next target, the investigation revealed. My fight had saved him from the same fate. To Priya, he raised his glass, who refused to be erased. Miranda serves her time in federal prison. I get updates occasionally from former coworkers. She maintains her innocence, claims she was protecting American jobs from unqualified foreigners. She's banned from holding any position of authority over visa workers upon release, a small justice for the career she destroyed. Jessica reached out once, a long email full of apologies and explanations. She genuinely believed she was qualified, genuinely thought I was struggling at work based on her aunt's lies. She's in therapy, she said, processing how family loyalty was weaponized to hurt innocent people. I didn't reply, but I hope she's learned. The experience changed me. I document everything now, every meeting, every conversation, every assignment. I know my rights, know immigration law better than some lawyers. I mentor other visa holders, teaching them to protect themselves from the Miranda Whitfields of the world. Trust but verify, I tell them. And always, always keep receipts. Because the truth is, Miranda wasn't unique. She was just careless enough to get caught. For every Miranda in prison, there are dozens operating carefully, legally, using the complexity of immigration law to terrorize workers who can't fight back. Who know that visa holders will accept abuse rather than risk deportation. Who weaponize bureaucracy for personal gain. But we're not powerless. We have rights, voices, recourse. Miranda thought my accent and visa status made me disposable. She learned that immigration doesn't determine worth, that temporary status doesn't mean temporary humanity. I'm still here, still coding, still building, still contributing to the country I chose and that chose me back. Despite Miranda's best efforts, my green card application is processing smoothly. My team values my work. My marriage is strong. Miranda stole 2 years of my life, but she gave me something too. The knowledge that I could survive anything the system threw at me. That my worth wasn't determined by a visa stamp. That belonging isn't granted by managers or bureaucrats, but earned through resilience, integrity, and refusing to be erased. From her prison cell, Miranda can see the walls she built to keep me out. From my corner office, earned honestly this time, I can see the bridges I built to return. I know which hue I prefer.
For 7 years, I lived like a ghost. My life was a series of sacrifices stacked one on top of the other, all for a single number, $50,000. That was the goal, the light at the end of a very long, very dark tunnel. It was my deposit on a small house, a place with a door I could lock, and a silence that belonged only to me. My name is Freya Sullivan. I'm 28 years old, and until 2 weeks ago I thought that number was my future. To get there, I worked 2 jobs. From 9 to 5, I was an administrative assistant at a logistics firm, a world of spreadsheets and shipping manifests. From 6 to 11, I served overpriced cocktails to people who thought a vacation was a human right. I drove a 2004 sedan with a rust problem and a tape deck. I packed my own lunches, I mended my own clothes, and I hadn't taken a real day off in 3 years. Every dollar I didn't spend on rent or instant noodles went into that high-yield savings account. It was my life's work, sitting there in a neat little row of digits. Then, my mother called. "Freya, honey, it's a catastrophe," Raquel said, her voice tight with a practiced panic I knew all too well. "The roof. It's all coming down. The inspector said the whole thing is rotten through. We have to replace it immediately, or the city will condemn the house." I could hear my father, Hugh, mumbling in the background, something about structural integrity and black mould. He never spoke up, just provided the ambient noise for my mother's dramas. "How much?" I asked, my stomach clenching. 50,000, she said, and the number hit me like a physical blow. "We don't have it, Freya. We'll be homeless. After all the years we put into that house. Your childhood home." The guilt was a well-oiled machine. She knew exactly which levers to pull. I was the responsible one, the fallback plan. My brother Wallace, who is 2 years older than me, was the one you celebrated, not the one you called in a crisis. He was the investment. I was the insurance policy. For a day I agonized. I stared at my banking app, at the number I had bled for. It represented 84 months of my life. But the image of my parents being forced out of their home, the shame of it, was more than I could bear. They were my parents. This is what a good daughter does. So I did it. I initiated the wire transfer. I watched the number drain from my account and reappear in theirs. A small, automated email confirmed the transaction. My dream, vaporized in a single click. When I called to tell them, my mother cried with relief. "You saved us, Freya. You're such a good daughter. We'll pay you back, I promise, as soon as we can." I felt hollow, but also a little proud. I had done the right thing. Exactly 1 week later, we were all gathered at my parents' house for our mandatory Sunday dinner. The roof looked exactly the same. When I'd asked about the construction, my mother waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, the contractor is just waiting on a special permit. Red tape, you know." Wallace arrived late, his fiancée Savannah on his arm. He was glowing, practically vibrating with self-importance. Savannah was sweet, a genuinely kind person who seemed blissfully unaware of the family she was marrying into. After dinner, my mother clinked a spoon against her wineglass. "Hugh and I have a wonderful announcement to make," she declared, beaming at my brother. Wallace stood up, pulling Savannah with him. "We're getting married," he announced, "and thanks to Mom and Dad's incredible generosity, we've booked the most amazing venue." My mother preened. "Nothing is too good for my boy's special day. We're so proud to give him the wedding he deserves." Savannah held up her hand, showing off a diamond that could probably pay for 3 roofs. "It's going to be at the Smithfield Chapel and Vineyard," she gushed. "It's a dream come true." The name hit me like a bucket of ice water. Smithfield Vineyard. My blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt and go quiet. Because I knew that name. I had seen it just last week, on the day I transferred the money. Wallace had stopped by my apartment to borrow a drill, and I'd seen a glossy, trifold brochure sitting on the passenger seat of his new SUV. The elegant script was unmistakable. Smithfield Chapel and Vineyard, where forever begins. I spent the rest of that Sunday dinner in a fog. I smiled, I nodded, I passed the gravy. On the outside, I was the same quiet, dependable Freya. Inside, a cold, heavy dread was spreading through my veins. The name of that vineyard echoed in my head, a mocking chant. Smithfield, Smithfield. It felt impossible, a coincidence too cruel to be real. But the look of smug satisfaction on my mother's face as she watched Wallace and Savannah accept congratulations was all the confirmation I needed. I drove home on autopilot, my knuckles white on the steering wheel of my junk car. The injustice of it was a physical weight in my chest. My 7 years of scrimping, of saying no to friends, of eating cheap pasta, had just paid for Wallace's fairy tale wedding. The next few days were a blur of feigned normalcy. I went to both my jobs. I answered my mother's cheerful texts. I even liked a photo Savannah posted of the vineyard. But every spare moment was spent in a state of quiet panic. I needed to know for sure. I couldn't confront them on a suspicion. I needed proof. My chance came that Saturday. My mother called and asked me to stop by the house to pick up a box of my old childhood books she'd cleared out of the attic. "Making space for wedding gifts," she'd chirped. When I got there, she was in the garden, and my father was out running errands. The house was quiet. As I was heading for the stairs, I heard her voice drifting from the open door of the sunroom. She was on the phone, her tone light and conspiratorial. I paused in the hallway, hidden from view. "Brenda, you're worrying for nothing," my mother said, followed by a tinkling laugh. Of course, Freya was a little disappointed to drain her savings, but she understood it was a family emergency. A beat of silence. "Well, we just repurposed the funds. It was for a much more important family milestone. A wedding is forever. A daughter can always save up again." The words hit me with the force of a physical impact. Repurpose the funds. A daughter can always save up again. There it was, the casual, callous dismissal of my entire life's work. I wasn't a person to her. I was a resource, a renewable one. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I backed away silently, my heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed the box of books from the hallway and was about to leave when my cousin Haley, who lives a few doors down, popped in through the unlocked back door. "Hey, Frey, just dropping off your mum's casserole dish," she said, then lowered her voice. "Saw Wallace's post about the venue. Fancy. Guess it pays to be the golden child, huh?" "He's always been the favourite." She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. It was a known fact, a family joke I was never in on. She gave me a sympathetic smile and disappeared into the kitchen. The confirmation, coming from someone else, twisted the knife. All those years I thought I was just being sensitive. The missed school events, the birthdays overshadowed by Wallace's soccer trophies, the way their praise for him was loud and public while their expectations for me were silent and heavy. It wasn't in my head. It was real. A hot, furious wave of anger washed over me, but it was followed by something else, a cold, clear resolve. Screaming and crying wouldn't get me my money back. It would just get me labelled as dramatic and ungrateful. No, I wasn't going to confront them. I was going to dismantle their lie piece by piece, until the truth was the only thing left standing. My first move was to find the evidence of the so-called roof repair. I walked into my father's small office, my hands steady. He was meticulous with paperwork. On his desk, in a neat wire tray labelled Household, was a manila folder. Inside, I found exactly what I was looking for. It was an invoice, printed on cheap paper, from a company called Apex Roofing and Restoration. The total was exactly $50,000, marked paid in full. It looked official enough, at a glance, but the logo was slightly pixelated. The font was Times New Roman, and there was no business address, just a P.O. box. I pulled out my phone and typed the company name into a search engine. The result came back instantly. No results found for Apex Roofing and Restoration. It wasn't a real company. The invoice was a complete fabrication. They hadn't even tried to make it look convincing. They just assumed I would never check. They assumed I would trust them. The first person I called was Tessa. We met at a dive bar halfway between our apartments, the kind of place with sticky floors and cheap beer that was perfect for plotting. I laid everything out on the table between our drinks. A photo of the fake invoice on my phone, the story of the overheard phone call, the damning detail of the Smithfield brochure in Wallace's car. Tessa, my friend since high school, and a paralegal with a finely tuned sense of injustice, listened without interrupting. Her expression went from sympathetic to furious. "They fabricated a legal document to defraud you of $50,000, she said, her voice dangerously low. "Frey, this isn't just a family squabble. This is a crime." "I know," I said, taking a long sip of my beer. "But calling the cops on my own parents feels extreme. And it wouldn't get me my money back, not really. It would just blow everything up. So what's the plan? You can't just let this go." "I'm not. But my first question is, does Wallace know?" I asked. "Is he in on it, or is he just the oblivious beneficiary of their scam?" Tessa leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "We can find that out." For the next week, we became private investigators. Tessa was the brains of the operation. She showed me how to use public record databases and how to phrase my questions to get the information I needed. I became the operative, playing the part of the dutiful daughter and sister. I started by recording my phone calls, checking my state's one-party consent laws first. I called my dad. "Hey Dad, just wanted to check in on the roof." "Has the work started yet?" "Oh, Hugh stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Permits. Your mother's handling it. It's all very complicated." He sounded terrified of saying the wrong thing. That was my father in a nutshell, a ghost in his own life. Next, I texted Wallace. "The vineyard looks gorgeous in your pictures. So excited for you guys. Mum and Dad must have really stretched to get you a place like that." His reply came back a minute later. "I know, right? They've been amazing. Mum said they've been saving for this for years, said it was my inheritance coming a little early." There it was. He was clueless. He genuinely believed our parents were wealthy benefactors, not thieves who had stolen his sister's future to fund his present. In a way, it was worse. He was so wrapped up in his own golden child narrative that he couldn't even conceive of a world where he wasn't the centre of their universe. The final piece of the puzzle was the money trail. I didn't need to hack any accounts. I had my own bank statement showing the $50,000 wire transfer to my parents' joint account on a specific date. Then, I called the Smithfield Vineyard, pretending to be my mother's personal assistant. "Hi, I'm just calling on behalf of Raquel Sullivan," I said in my most professional phone voice. "She's misplaced her receipt for the deposit on the Wallace-Sullivan wedding and needs a copy for her records. Could you possibly email one over?" The cheerful event coordinator didn't hesitate. "Of course. I have it right here. The deposit of $50,000 was received 2 days after you made the initial booking. She confirmed the date. It was less than 24 hours after my money had landed in my parents' account. I saved everything. The bank statements, the screenshot of Wallace's text, the doctored invoice, the recording of my call with my dad, the PDF of the vineyard deposit. I created a folder on a secure cloud drive, each piece of evidence a brick in the wall I was building. That Sunday, we had another family dinner. The air was thick with wedding talk. My mother held court, describing floral arrangements and colour palettes. Wallace and Savannah sat there, soaking it all in. "It's just so important to start their new life off on the right foot," Raquel said, placing a hand on Wallace's shoulder. "This wedding, it's more than just a party. It's the crown jewel of the Sullivan legacy." I watched them, a small, serene smile on my face. The anger that had been churning in my gut for weeks had cooled into something hard and clear. I felt nothing but a quiet, patient certainty. My mother turned to me. "You've been so quiet, Freya. Aren't you excited for your brother?" I met her gaze across the table. "Of course," I said, my voice even and light. "I've been thinking about it a lot, actually. I have the perfect wedding gift for him." Later that night, I sat at my laptop and composed a polite, carefully worded email. It was addressed to Liam and Solstice Chavez. I introduced myself as Wallace's sister and asked if they, along with Savannah, might be available for a quiet lunch the following week. I told them there were a few financial details about the wedding I felt, in good conscience, they needed to be aware of. I hit send, and the trap was set. Liam Chavez suggested a quiet Italian restaurant in the city's business district, a place with white tablecloths and hushed conversations. It was neutral territory. When I arrived, they were already seated at a corner booth. Liam, with his sharp, assessing eyes, his wife Solstice, elegant and composed, and Savannah, who gave me a warm, if slightly nervous, smile. We started with polite small talk. They asked about my job. I asked about their trip to Europe last spring. For 20 minutes, we were just 4 people having a pleasant lunch. I let them lead, waiting for the right moment. It came when Solstice mentioned how thrilled they were with the venue choice. "Smithfield is just breathtaking," she said. "Raquel and Hugh have been so incredibly generous. We were stunned when Wallace told us they were covering the entire venue fee." This was my opening. I took a careful sip of water. "They are very generous," I agreed, keeping my voice level. "Especially with money they don't have." The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. Liam put his fork down. Solstice's smile tightened. Savannah just looked confused. "I'm sorry?" Liam said, his tone no longer friendly but professional. "What does that mean?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a slim portfolio folder. "I didn't want to have this conversation," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I love my brother, and I think you are a wonderful family. But I can't, in good conscience, let you walk into this marriage based on a foundation of lies." I slid the first document across the table. It was a copy of the fake roofing invoice. "A few weeks ago, my parents called me in a panic. They said their roof was collapsing and they needed $50,000 immediately or they'd be homeless. I'm not wealthy, but I've been saving for a down payment on a house for 7 years." That was the exact amount I had saved. I pushed my bank statement across next, the wire transfer highlighted in yellow. So I gave it to them. Every penny. Savannah's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Freya, no." Then, a week later, I continued, my eyes fixed on Liam. They announced they had paid the deposit for the wedding venue. I slid the final document over, the receipt from Smithfield Vineyard, showing a $50,000 payment received the day after my money landed in their account. I did a little checking. The roofing company on that invoice doesn't exist. Silence. Liam picked up the documents, his eyes scanning each one with practiced speed. Solstice read over his shoulder, her expression turning to stone. Savannah just stared at the papers, her face pale with shock. She looked from the fake invoice to my bank statement, the pieces clicking into place. They lied, she whispered. It wasn't a question. They stole from you, Liam said, his voice a low, controlled rumble. He looked at me, his gaze sharp. They committed fraud to pay for their son's wedding, using your life savings. They told Wallace it was his inheritance, I said quietly. He thinks they're just wonderful, supportive parents. Solstice finally spoke, her voice laced with ice. They didn't just lie to you, Freya. They lied to us. They've been presenting themselves as Wallace's financial backers for this entire affair. She looked at her daughter, her expression softening with concern. This isn't just about money, sweetheart. It's about character. Savannah looked like she was about to cry. She shook her head slowly, as if trying to dislodge a thought. Does Wallace know? She asked, her voice barely audible. Does he know where the money really came from? I met her gaze, and for the first time, I let a flicker of the cold fury I'd been suppressing show. I paused, letting the weight of the question hang in the air. Not yet. The drive home was a blur. I felt drained, empty. The plan was in motion, and I had no control over it anymore. That evening, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the wedding caterer, a generic scheduling update sent to the entire bridal party. I was about to delete it when I saw a second email, sent just a minute later. It was a recall notice from the caterer's system. The subject line was simple. Recalled. Catering tasting appointment for Chavez-Sullivan wedding? Savannah had cancelled it. Without a word, without an explanation. The first card had been pulled from the bottom of the deck. The silence lasted for 2 days. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet that felt louder than any argument. I went to work, came home, and waited. I knew the Chavez family wasn't the type to let something like this slide. Liam was a businessman. He dealt in facts and consequences. The storm was gathering, and my family had no idea they were standing in its path. The explosion happened on a Tuesday night. I was just getting home from my second job, exhausted and smelling like stale beer and lime wedges, when my phone rang. It was my mother. I ignored it. It rang again immediately. I ignored it again. Then came a string of texts, each one more frantic than the last. Call me now. The Chavez family's here. What did you do? Freya, you are destroying this family. I sank onto my sofa, the phone buzzing in my hand like an angry insect. I didn't need to be there to picture the scene. Liam and Solstice, armed with my folder of evidence, sitting in my parents' pristine living room. Savannah, heartbroken and silent, and my mother, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The full story came to me later in pieces, mostly from a hysterical voicemail my mother left me and a follow-up call from my cousin Haley, whose mother had gotten the blow-by-blow from Raquel. Apparently, the Chavez family had requested a meeting under the guise of discussing the wedding budget. They let my parents and Wallace talk for 10 minutes before Liam calmly placed my evidence on the coffee table. He didn't raise his voice. He simply laid out the facts, one document at a time, just as I had done for him. Wallace was the first to break. According to Haley, he just stared at the papers, completely blindsided. He looked at the fake invoice, then at my bank statement, then at his parents. What is this? He'd asked, his voice shaking. Mum? Dad? What is Freya's savings account doing in here? My father, true to form, shrank into his armchair and said nothing. But Raquel, cornered and exposed, didn't apologize. She attacked. We did what we had to do for our son, she had shrieked, her voice stripped of its usual polished charm. Freya has nothing and no one. That money was just sitting there. It was better used to give Wallace and Savannah a proper start in life than for some loner fantasy of hers about a tiny house. The words, relayed to me hours later, still had the power to cut. Loner fantasy. That's what she called my dream. That was the moment everything shattered. Wallace finally understood. The money wasn't an inheritance. It wasn't a gift. It was stolen property. He turned on Raquel, his face white with fury and humiliation. You did this. You lied to me. You stole from my sister to pay for my wedding. You've ruined everything. It was the ultimate betrayal for him, not because of what they did to me, but because of how it made him look in front of the Chavezes. His perfect image was destroyed. Savannah had been crying silently through the whole thing. When the yelling finally subsided, she stood up, took the engagement ring off her finger, and placed it on the table next to the fake invoice. "I can't marry into a family like this," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm so sorry, Wallace, but this is over." And with that, she and her parents walked out, leaving the wreckage of the Sullivan legacy behind them. I turned my phone off after hearing the story. I didn't want to hear from any of them. I made a cup of tea, sat in the dark, and felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a profound, hollow emptiness. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. Hours later, long after midnight, there was a frantic pounding on my apartment door. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Wallace stood on my doorstep, his face blotchy and tear-streaked, his hair a mess. He looked completely broken. I opened the door. He didn't wait for an invitation, just stumbled inside. "You did this," he choked out, his voice thick with tears and accusation. "She left me. Savannah is gone. You did this to me." He wasn't angry, not really. He was just a child whose favourite toy had been taken away. He sank onto my cheap rug, sobbing. "Why, Freya? Why would you do this? It was my wedding. You ruined it." "All out of jealousy." I looked down at my brother, a 30-year-old man crumpled on the floor of my tiny apartment, and the emptiness I'd felt earlier was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The accusation of jealousy was so predictable, so perfectly in character. He couldn't see the theft, the lies, the betrayal. He could only see his own pain. "Get up, Wallace," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of sympathy. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "You have to fix this. Call Savannah. Tell her you lied. Tell her it was all a misunderstanding. Please, Freya. I love her." I almost laughed. He wanted me to lie for him, to erase my own truth, to restore his comfortable fiction. He wanted me to take the blame for a fire my parents had started with my life savings as kindling. "No," I said. "What?" "No, I'm not fixing this. I didn't break it." I crossed my arms. "You want to know what this feels like, Wallace? This hollowed out, everything is ruined feeling? This is what fairness feels like to me. You're just experiencing it for the first time." He stared at me as if I were a stranger, the concept of my having a legitimate grievance completely foreign to him. He finally staggered to his feet, his face hardening from self-pity into resentment. "I can't believe you," he spat. "You'd rather see me miserable than be happy for 5 minutes." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The next few days were chaos. News of the broken engagement ripped through our extended family like a wildfire. My phone became a weapon, buzzing with calls and texts from aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. I was painted as both a vindictive monster and a righteous hero, depending on who was telling the story. My Aunt Brenda, my mother's sister, left me a scathing voicemail calling me a selfish, jealous little girl who couldn't stand to see her brother happy. My cousin Haley, on the other hand, sent a text that just said, "About damn time someone stood up to Raquel. You have my vote." I was getting whiplash from the sheer volume of family drama. Some relatives sent threats, others sent messages of quiet support. It was exhausting. Through it all, my parents were silent. I heard nothing from them directly. The real surprise came from my father. He showed up at my apartment on Friday evening, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, twisting his hat in his hands. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside, wary. He sat on the edge of my sofa, refusing to meet my eyes. "Your mother, she's not handling this well," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "She's telling everyone you made it all up." "I have proof, Dad." "I know," he said, finally looking at me. And for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't fear or avoidance. It was shame. "I know you do. I saw the folder." Liam Chavez is not a man you want to have as an enemy. He called our lawyer this morning. He used words like fraud and civil action. The threat of a lawsuit. That's what it took. Not the betrayal of his daughter, but the fear of legal and financial ruin. I told Raquel we have to pay you back, he said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. Immediately. All of it. Before this gets any worse. It was wrong, Freya. What we did was wrong. I should have stopped her. It was the closest I would ever get to an apology from him, and we both knew it. It wasn't about morality, it was about damage control. But it was also the first time in my life I had ever seen him stand up to my mother about anything. He left a few minutes later, the air between us still thick with unspoken things. The next day, my mother finally broke her silence. It wasn't a phone call, it was a single, imperious text message. Your father tells me you expect to be paid back. I am willing to do that on one condition. You will write a public letter of apology to this family, to Wallace, and to the Chavezes for the lies you've told and the pain you've caused. You will retract everything. Do this, and we can put it all behind us. Refuse, and you are no longer a part of this family. You will be cut out. Forever. I read my mother's text message 3 times. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She wasn't offering a truce. She was demanding a surrender. She wanted me to publicly humiliate myself, to take the fall for her crimes, all as an exchange for getting my own money back. She thought she could buy my silence and rewrite history, casting me as the villain. I didn't even dignify it with a response. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder of evidence I had so meticulously collected, and started writing. I didn't want to write a screaming, angry rant. I wanted to be calm, factual and irrefutable. I laid out the story from the beginning, starting with my 7 years of saving. I didn't use emotional language, I used dates, figures and facts. I attached a scanned copy of the fake invoice, a screenshot of my bank transfer, and a redacted copy of the Smithfield Vineyard deposit receipt. I told the story not to shame them, though a part of me certainly wanted to, but to set the record straight. I framed it as a cautionary tale. I ended the letter with a simple paragraph. I was asked to issue a public apology for the pain I've caused, but the truth does not require an apology. This is my truth. I am not the one who needs to be sorry. I posted it on my personal social media page, making the post public. Then I shared it to a few local community groups, the kind of places where neighbourhood gossip thrives. I tagged no one. I simply put the information out into the world and turned off my phone. For 24 hours, I lived in blissful ignorance. I went to work, I read a book, I deep-cleaned my kitchen. The next evening, Tessa called me on my landline. "You need to turn on your phone," she said, her voice a mix of awe and excitement. "You didn't just light a match, Freya, you dropped a bomb." When I finally powered my phone back on, it nearly melted. The post had been shared hundreds of times. The comment section was a war zone, but the tide had turned overwhelmingly in my favour. People I hadn't seen since grade school were leaving messages of support. Distant relatives I barely knew were publicly condemning my mother's actions. The story had escaped the confines of our family and was now public knowledge in our small suburban town. Raquel's reputation, the thing she valued above all else, was being dismantled by strangers on the internet. The real fallout came 2 days later. I got an email from a woman I didn't know. She introduced herself as the events manager for the Smithfield Chapel and Vineyard. "Ms. Sullivan," the email began, "we were made aware of a public post detailing the fraudulent circumstances under which a deposit was made for the Sullivan-Chavez wedding. Our establishment operates on a foundation of integrity, and we cannot, in good conscience, be associated with such a matter. We have informed the Sullivan family that we will be cancelling their event contract and refunding the deposit in full. We wish you the best." They had been blacklisted. Tessa, who had an ear to the ground on everything, called me an hour later. "It's spreading," she said. "Wallace has been trying to rebook at other venues, but no one will take him. The story is all over the local wedding vendor forums. No one wants to touch your family." My mother had built her entire identity on the illusion of the perfect family, the Sullivan legacy. I hadn't just exposed a lie, I had shattered the illusion, and without that, she had nothing. The final confirmation came on a Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after my mother's ultimatum. I was at my desk at the logistics firm when I got an email notification from my bank. I clicked it open, my heart starting to pound. The subject line was simple: incoming wire transfer. I opened the details. A transfer of $50,000 had been deposited into my savings account. The sender was my mother's personal account. In the memo line, there was a short, terse message. 6 words that screamed defeat. This ends now. Mom. The money sat in my account for a week before I touched it. It felt foreign, tainted. But as the days passed, the feeling of unease was replaced by a quiet sense of ownership. It was mine. I had earned it twice, once through labour and once through battle. The following month, I found it. A small fixer-upper on the edge of town, with good bones and a hopelessly outdated kitchen. It was exactly what I had dreamed of. The day I signed the papers and the keys were placed in my hand, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realised I'd been missing my entire life. The fallout with my family was as absolute as my mother's text had promised. I was an island now. I heard through the family grapevine that Wallace, unable to face the humiliation in his hometown, had moved to another state to start over. Raquel's social circle had evaporated, her reputation as the town matriarch in tatters. My father, as always, remained silent, a willing prisoner in the Cold War my mother had declared. I didn't know if they were still married. I didn't care enough to ask. I spent my weekends covered in drywall dust and paint. I tore out the old linoleum floors and learned how to lay down new laminate from online videos. The work was hard and slow, but every sore muscle, every splinter, was a testament to the fact that this was mine. I was building a life from the ground up, with no one to answer to but myself. One Saturday, as I was struggling to install a new cabinet, there was a knock on the door. It was Axel, a guy from my bartending job. He was a carpenter by day, a bartender by night, and had the calm, steady presence of someone who knows how to fix things. He'd overheard me complaining about my kitchen remodel and offered to help. "Figured you could use an extra pair of hands," he said, holding up a toolbox and a 6-pack of beer. He spent the afternoon helping me hang cabinets, his movements efficient and sure. We worked in a comfortable silence, punctuated by the sounds of the drill and the occasional curse word when a screw wouldn't cooperate. "You know," he said, wiping sawdust from his brow as we took a beer break on the porch, "I heard about what happened with your family. That took guts." I shrugged, looking out at the small, overgrown yard that was now mine. It just felt like the only option. "Sometimes the only option is to burn it all down and start over," he said, giving me a small, understanding smile. There was no pity in his eyes, just respect. It was a new feeling, and I found I liked it. The house slowly came together, each finished project a small victory. The silence I had craved for so long was finally mine. It wasn't an empty silence, but a peaceful one, filled with the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. They thought they could use me as a stepping stone and walk away clean, that my quiet nature meant I was weak, but karma always collects its debt, and I had simply been its patient, meticulous accountant. A few weeks ago, an invitation arrived in the mail. It was printed on elegant cream-coloured cardstock. Savannah was getting married. The groom's name was unfamiliar, but the accompanying photo showed her beaming, looking happier and more relaxed than I had ever seen her. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. "Freya," it read, "I know this is a lot to ask, but it would mean the world to me if you would come. You gave me a gift I didn't even know I needed. Thank you. I won't be going to the wedding. It's her day, her new beginning, and my presence would only be a reminder of a past she deserves to leave behind. But I did send a gift. I thought about what to get her for a long time. In the end, I sent a simple, framed print of a bird escaping its cage. With it, I included a card with a single word written inside: freedom.
The envelope felt too light to hold a lifetime of anything. Inside there was no sentimental letter, no apology, no explanation. Just a single crisp $50 bill clipped to a piece of notepaper. 4 words were scrawled in my mother's familiar, spiky handwriting. For gas money, dear. My name is Hallie Ellis. I'm 38 years old, and that $50 was my inheritance. I folded the note and tucked it into my pocket, my face a perfect mask of neutrality. Across the mahogany desk, our family lawyer, Ernest Rogers, a man of 65 who had known me since I was born, cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable, his gaze shifting between me and my older brother. "As you can see, Hallie," Ernest said, his voice gentle, "your mother Eleanor was very clear in her final wishes. The remainder of the estate, all accounts, assets, and personal effects, including the family home at 124 Willow Creek Lane, is to be transferred to your brother, Carter." Carter, who at 41 still had the smug look of the high school quarterback who'd never faced a real challenge, shifted in his leather chair. He was trying for sombre, but a triumphant glint in his eyes gave him away. He placed a comforting hand on my arm, a gesture of magnanimous pity that made my skin crawl. "I'm sorry, Hal," he murmured, his voice thick with fake sympathy. "You know how Mom was. Traditional. She always believed the house should stay with the man of the family." "I didn't pull my arm away. I didn't do anything. I just sat there, a ghost in a room full of my own history. My entire childhood was a training ground for moments like this, learning to absorb blows without flinching. I remembered being 10, my father ruffling Carter's hair after he'd won a Little League trophy. "That's my boy," he'd boomed, "the future man of this house." I'd been standing right there, holding a report card with straight A's, and he'd looked straight through me. Later, when I'd shown my mother, she glanced at it and said, "That's nice, dear. Now don't bother your father. He's celebrating with your brother." Then there was the time I was 16, heartbroken over a breakup. I'd been crying in my room when my mother opened the door without knocking. She didn't hug me. She didn't offer a kind word. She just sighed, a sound heavy with disappointment. "Honestly, Hallie, must you be so moody all the time? No wonder you can't keep a boyfriend. Your brother never has these problems." Carter was the sun, I was the shadow he cast. He was praised for breathing while I was criticised for my silence. They called me difficult, moody, and ungrateful. What I was observant. I saw every slight, every dismissive wave of the hand, every dollar spent on Carter's future, while I was told to find a nice man to take care of me. So I learned to take care of myself instead. "The deed will be formally transferred to Carter's name by the end of the week," Ernest continued, shuffling papers to avoid looking at me. "He will be able to take possession immediately." "Of course," Carter said smoothly. "Angela and Marley are already packing. We're hoping to move in this weekend. It'll be good for the house to feel like a family home again." The implication hung in the air, that it hadn't been a family home with just me and my mother in it, even though I was the one who paid her bills for the last 5 years. I was the one who arranged her care when she got sick. Carter just showed up for holidays to collect praise for being such a devoted son. I finally stood up. The meeting was over. I had what I came for. "Well," I said, my voice even. "Congratulations, Carter." He stood and pulled me into an awkward, one-armed hug. "It's what Mom and Dad would have wanted," he whispered into my hair, as if that sanctified the whole rotten affair. I pulled back and looked him dead in the eye. For a split second, I let the mask drop. I let him see the cold, hard calculation behind my gaze. His smile faltered. He saw something there he didn't recognize, and it made him uneasy. Good. I gave a polite nod to Ernest and walked out of the law office without another word. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I walked calmly to my black SUV, the kind of car my father always said was too much vehicle for a woman. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool against my skin. I didn't drive home to my condo. Instead, I drove through the familiar, tree-lined streets of my old neighbourhood. I drove past the park where I was told to watch Carter play baseball, past the school where his trophies filled a case in the main hall. I drove, until I reached 124 Willow Creek Lane. The house looked the same. A 2-story colonial with pale yellow siding and black shutters. The lawn was a little overgrown, a testament to my mother's final months. I saw Carter's car pull up behind me. He must have followed me, probably to gloat. I ignored him. I got out of my car, walked up the familiar stone pathway, and stopped at the front door. From my pocket, I pulled out not the $50 bill, but a small, solid key. I slid it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying metallic click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, leaving it open for him to watch. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of old paper, dust, and my mother's rose-scented perfume. It was the smell of a life shrinking, room by room, until all that was left was a single chair and a television. I ran my hand along the dusty mantelpiece, my fingers tracing the faint outlines where family photos used to hang, mostly of Carter. This house wasn't just a house. It was a monument to my family's selective memory, and I had bought it fair and square a year ago. It started with a piece of mail delivered to my condo by mistake. A pre-foreclosure notice for 124 Willow Creek Lane, addressed to my mother. She'd taken out a reverse mortgage years ago, a fact she'd conveniently never mentioned, and had fallen behind on the property taxes and insurance. The bank was ready to seize the property. My first instinct was to call her, to fix it. The old Hallie would have. But the old Hallie was tired. Instead, I called my best friend Stacey, a paralegal who knew her way around impenetrable paperwork. Through a shell company, a sterile, anonymous LLC I used for my real estate investments, we made an offer directly to the bank. We paid off the lien, satisfied the mortgage, and the deed was transferred to HE Properties LLC. My mother never knew. She just knew the scary letters stopped coming. She probably credited Carter with talking to some important friend of his. She always did. My path to HE Properties was paved with other people's leftovers. After college, I took jobs doing estate cleanouts. I hauled junk from the homes of the dead, and I learned to see the value in what people threw away. A dusty painting, a set of sterling silver, a first edition book. I sold them, saved every penny, and eventually had enough for a down payment on a dilapidated duplex. I fixed it up myself, living in one half while I gutted the other. Grit, hustle, and silence. That's how I built my life. A key fumbled in the front door lock, followed by Carter's impatient muttering. The door swung open, and he stood there, silhouetted against the afternoon light. "Hal? What the hell are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the empty hall. He saw the bottle of champagne and 2 flutes I'd set on the coffee table. His face darkened. "Are you taking things?" The will was perfectly clear. "I'm not taking anything," I said calmly, pouring a glass for myself. "I'm celebrating." Just then, a minivan pulled into the driveway. Carter's wife, Angela, got out, looking impeccable as always in a cream-coloured pantsuit that probably cost more than my first car. She wrinkled her nose as she stepped inside. Behind her trailed their 16-year-old daughter, Marley, her eyes wide, as she took in the house she'd only visited on holidays. "Carter, what's going on?" Angela asked, her voice dripping with condescension. She looked me up and down. "Hallie, I suppose you're here to pick up a few sentimental items before we move in." The way she said sentimental items made it sound like scraps from the table. "Something like that," I said, taking a slow sip of champagne. Carter's patience snapped. "Get out, Hallie. This is my house now. You heard Ernest. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Your house?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up a thick manila folder I'd left there. "That's funny, because according to this, it's my house." I pulled out the grant deed and handed it to him. He snatched it from my hand, his eyes scanning the document. I watched the colour drain from his face. He read it, then read it again, his finger tracing the legal lines. "HE Properties, LLC. What is this?" he stammered. "That's my company," I said simply. "I'm the sole proprietor. I bought this house 13 months ago when Mom was about to lose it to the bank. The will is irrelevant." "You can't inherit something that was never hers to give." Angela peered over his shoulder, her perfectly painted mouth falling open. "You're lying. This is some kind of trick." "It's all filed with the county recorder's office, Angela. It's a matter of public record," I said, enjoying the look of pure, unadulterated shock on her face. Marley stood frozen by the door, her gaze flicking between her furious parents and me. She was seeing something new, and the gears were turning. Carter threw the deed onto the floor. "You snake! You went behind our backs, behind Mom's back." "I saved her from being evicted," I corrected him, "while you were busy accepting her praise for being the man of the family. You never once asked her how she was paying the bills, did you?" He had no answer for that. He just stood there sputtering, his face turning a blotchy red. Angela looked like she was about to be sick. I picked up my champagne flute and took another sip, letting the silence stretch. Then I delivered the final, beautiful blow. "You should probably find a hotel for the weekend," I said, my voice as cool and crisp as the champagne. "I have demolition permits filed. This house is being gutted next week." A few days later, the house was filled with a different kind of silence, the quiet hum of potential. I walked through the empty rooms with my contractor, Kai Gomez. At 34, he had a calm, steady presence that I valued in a business partner. He moved with a quiet confidence, tapping on walls and making notes on a tablet. "This is a load-bearing wall, obviously," he said, rapping his knuckles on the plaster between the living room and dining room. "But we can open it up with a laminated beam. It'll completely change the feel of the space." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. I saw my father, sitting in his armchair right where Kai was standing, not looking up from his newspaper as I came home with a debate team trophy. "Don't block the television, Hallie," was all he'd said. We moved into the kitchen. The yellow linoleum was cracked, the countertops a hideous shade of avocado green. Kai ran a hand over the formica. Full gut. New plumbing, new electrical. The works. This was the room where my mother taught Carter how to make his lumpy, terrible pancakes, praising him like he was a world-renowned chef. The one time I tried to help, I'd spilled a drop of batter on the floor. She'd snatched the bowl from my hands. "You're too clumsy for this," she'd snapped. "Go set the table. Try not to break anything." "Hallie?" Kai's voice pulled me back to the present. "You good?" "Yeah," I said, shaking off the memory. "Good. Let's do it." "All of it." My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Angela. I'd been ignoring her calls for 2 days, but I knew it was a temporary solution. I finally answered. "Hallie, thank God," she began, her voice a syrupy blend of fake concern and steel. "Carter is a wreck. We're staying at my sister's, and it's just awful. The children are all cramped together. You can't do this to us." "I'm not doing anything to you, Angela. This is a business transaction." "Business?" "This is family," she insisted, hitting the word like a drum. "What will people think? You? Kicking your own brother out of his childhood home right after his mother passed away. It's cruel." "He has the money from Mom's accounts," I said flatly. "He can rent a place. Or buy one. It's the principle of the thing. For Marley's sake, Hallie. She's so upset. You have to let us stay, just for a little while, until we get on our feet." "The demolition starts Monday," I said, and hung up. Later that evening, a text came through from an unknown number. "Is it true what my mum said? That you bought Grandma's house a year ago?" I knew it was Marley. "Yes," I typed back. A moment later, another message. Why? I thought about how to answer that, because it was the only way to make sure it wasn't lost. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared for a long time before she finally replied. "Oh." The next day, I went back to the house alone. The movers I'd hired had cleared out the last of my mother's furniture, donating most of it as per my instructions. All that was left was the attic. It was hot and smelled of cedar and decay. I pulled on a dust mask and started sorting through the debris of a life I was never fully a part of. Old holiday decorations, moth-eaten clothes, stacks of magazines. Tucked away in a dark corner, under a pile of my father's old army blankets, was a banker's box. It wasn't labelled. It was just sealed with yellowed tape. Carter's handwriting was on the side in faded marker. Keepsakes. He must have stashed it here years ago and forgotten about it. Curiosity got the better of me. I sliced the tape with my utility knife and lifted the lid. Inside were old photo albums, the kind with the sticky plastic pages. Pictures of my parents' wedding, of Carter as a baby, of me as a sullen-looking toddler, always on the edge of the frame. There were bundles of letters tied with ribbon, mostly from my mother to my father when he was stationed overseas. I dug deeper, my fingers brushing against something hard. It was a small wooden box, not a jewellery box, but a document box, the kind you keep important papers in. It wasn't locked. Inside, nestled among my father's military medals and a few dried flowers, was a thick envelope. My breath caught in my throat. It was addressed to me. Just Hallie. The handwriting was my father's. In the top right corner was a postage stamp, cancelled. I held it up to the single dusty light bulb. The postmark was clear. It was dated the week he died. And across the seal on the back, where it had been carefully glued shut, someone had placed a single neat piece of clear tape. It had been opened and then resealed. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke the tape and slid the letter out. The paper was thick, expensive stationery, the kind my father used for important correspondence. His handwriting was a familiar, forceful scrawl. "My dearest Hallie," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone. There are things a man puts off saying, and I am ashamed to admit I have been a coward. I know I wasn't always the father you deserved. I saw how your mother favoured Carter, and I did nothing to stop it. I told myself it was just how she was, but that was an excuse. You have a fire in you, a quiet strength that your mother never understood, and frankly, that I think scared her a little. She saw weakness in your silence. I always saw a mind at work. I am not leaving you without a safety net. This house, this life, it was always meant for Carter. He needs it. He doesn't have your grit, but you are meant for something else. A few years ago, I used my inheritance from your grandmother to purchase the lakefront property on Stillwater Drive. It is yours, free and clear. The deed is in your name, filed away in my office safe. Ernest Rogers has the combination and instructions to give it to you. It's a place for you to build, to make something of your own, away from the shadows of this family. Be well, my girl. Know that you were loved. Dad." I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through a film of tears I hadn't realised were forming. A lakefront property, a place just for me. He hadn't forgotten me. He'd seen me all along. The grief and the validation hit me with the force of a physical blow. Then the cold reality set in. I'd never received it. Ernest had never mentioned it. The letter had been intercepted. A memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. I'd been away at a weekend debate tournament, the one that secured my college scholarship. I'd called home, and Carter had answered. He'd said Dad was sleeping, that he'd been going through old files all day and was exhausted. My father had his heart attack 2 days later. Carter had been here, alone with him, while I was gone. He'd been helping with the paperwork. The rage that filled me was a cold, clean fire. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was theft on a scale I hadn't imagined. He hadn't just stolen an inheritance, he'd stolen my father's last words to me. The next morning, I was on the phone with Stacey. "I need you to run a property search," I said, my voice tight. "Stillwater Drive." "I don't have a lot number, but it's lakefront. Search for anything under my father's name. Or mine, Hallie Ellis, going back about 15 years. "What's this about?" she asked, her tone all business. I told her everything. She was silent for a moment. "That bastard," she finally breathed. "I'm on it." 2 hours later, she called back. "You're not going to like this. The property was purchased by your father 14 years ago. But the deed was never officially recorded with the county under your name. A year after your father's death, a new deed was filed. The property was transferred from your father's estate into a blind trust, the Willow Creek Trust. Guess who the trustee is?" "Let me guess," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "Carter Ellis." "Bingo. And it gets better. 3 years ago, the Willow Creek Trust sold the property to a newly formed LLC for $1. The LLC is registered to an address in Delaware, but the signatory on the incorporation documents is Angela. Corporate theft. He'd used his knowledge of Dad's affairs to create a paper trail so convoluted it was designed to never be found. He'd laundered my inheritance through a series of legal maneuvers, selling it to himself for nothing. The fury solidified into a plan. A cold, methodical, and utterly ruthless plan. Exposing him in the house was just the appetizer. Now, I was going for the main course. This wouldn't be a quiet family dispute. This would be public. It would be humiliating. It would be a spectacle. That evening, as I was drawing up a list of documents I needed to gather, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and was surprised to see Ernest Rogers standing on my doorstep, looking older and more worried than he had in his office. I opened the door. "Hallie?" he said, his voice low. "I apologise for the late hour. May I come in?" I stepped aside, my guard immediately up. He walked into my living room, looking around at the clean, minimalist space. It was a world away from the cluttered, suffocating house on Willow Creek Lane. "I couldn't say what I needed to at the office," he began, turning to face me. His eyes were heavy with a burden he'd clearly been carrying for a long time. "Carter was there." And frankly, I was afraid of what he might have already done. He took a deep breath. "There's something you don't know about your mother's will. Something she kept even from Carter." I stared at Ernest, my mind racing. "What are you talking about?" "A week before she passed, your mother called me to her hospital room," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was lucid, but weak. She had me draft an addendum to her will, a codicil. It was simple, handwritten on a single page. She signed it, and her nurse witnessed it. It was legally binding." "An addendum for what?" "She left you half of her liquid assets," Ernest said, finally meeting my eyes. "Everything in her savings and checking accounts. It wasn't a fortune, but it was close to $100,000. She told me she wanted to make things right in the end." He sighed, a weary, defeated sound. "I put the original in a sealed envelope and gave it to Carter to file with her other papers, as he was the executor. I told him explicitly what it was, and that it superseded the previous terms regarding the accounts. Of course he did. And Carter, knowing he'd already stolen the lake house from me, probably saw the 100,000 as a pittance he was still unwilling to part with. He'd buried it, just like he'd buried our father's letter. He never filed it," I stated. It wasn't a question. "No," Ernest confirmed. "When I saw the $50 bill, I knew he'd hidden it. I confronted him after you left, and he claimed your mother was confused, that she wasn't of sound mind. It's a lie, Hallie. I have my own notarized copy right here." He reached into his briefcase and handed me a folder. Inside was a photocopy of the addendum, my mother's shaky signature at the bottom, next to a nurse's neat script. The perfect weapon had just fallen into my lap. And Angela, in her infinite wisdom, had just handed me the perfect arena to deploy it. She'd been calling and texting relentlessly, insisting on a family dinner at her sister's house to smooth things over. It was a transparent attempt to ambush me, to guilt-trip me in front of an audience into letting them stay in the house. "Fine," I finally texted back. "Saturday at 7. I walked into a war zone disguised as a dinner party. Carter's entire family was there, aunts, uncles, cousins, all looking at me with varying degrees of pity and disapproval. Angela greeted me at the door with a kiss on the cheek that felt like a snake bite. "Hallie, I'm so glad you came to your senses," she whispered. Carter stood by the fireplace, a drink in his hand, looking haggard. He was trying to project his usual arrogance, but the foundation was cracked. They sat me down, and the passive-aggressive onslaught began. "It must be so lonely rattling around in that big house all by yourself," one aunt chirped. "Family has to stick together, especially in times of grief," an uncle added, staring pointedly at me. I let them talk, sipping my water, a picture of calm. Marley was sitting on the stairs, just out of sight of the main living room, but I could see her peeking through the banister, listening to every word. Finally, Carter spoke. "Look, Hal," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. We all know Mom's will was her final wish. She wanted me to have the house. For you to try and steal it on a technicality. It's just not right. That was my cue. Speaking of Mom's final wishes, I said, my voice cutting through the room's chatter, weren't you supposed to file the addendum to her will with Ernest? The one she signed the week before she died? The colour drained from Carter's face. Angela's smile froze. I don't know what you're talking about, he blustered. The one leaving me half of her bank accounts, I continued, my voice level and clear. The one you hid because you're a thief. Just like you hid the deed to the lake house Dad left me. The one you sold to yourself for $1 through a shell company registered in your wife's name. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. From the stairs, I heard a small gasp. Marley. That's a lie! Angela shrieked, jumping to her feet. You're a vindictive, horrible person, making up these lies to hurt us. It's not a lie, I said, pulling a thick stack of papers from my bag. Stacey had worked miracles. It's a paper trail. Here's a copy of the addendum, notarized by Ernest. Here's the original deed to the lake house in my name, from Dad's files. And here, I said, tossing the last folder onto the coffee table, are the incorporation papers for the Willow Creek Trust and the LLC you used to steal it. Your signatures are on every single page. Carter looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. The aunts and uncles were staring, mouths agape, looking back and forth between the papers and my brother's crumbling facade. Marley appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. Dad? Is that true? She whispered. Angela rushed to her side. Don't listen to her, baby. She's twisting things. But the proof was right there, in black and white, for the whole family to see. The world they had built on a foundation of lies was shattering around them. Carter finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. You'll regret this. Angela grabbed his arm. We'll sue you for everything you have. Slander. Defamation. I leaned in close, my voice a low whisper only they could hear. Bring it on. Let's dance. True to my word, the demolition began Monday morning, but Carter and his family hadn't left. Angela's sister had apparently kicked them out after the disastrous dinner party, and with their assets now under scrutiny, they couldn't get a short-term lease. They were squatting in a house that was legally mine. I didn't call the police. An eviction would be messy and slow. I had a much better plan. At 7 a.m. sharp, Kai's crew arrived. The first thing they did was remove all the windows, replacing them with thick sheets of plywood. The house was plunged into a gloomy twilight, the only light coming from bare work lamps. Then came the drywall. They didn't tear it down, not yet. They just stripped off the wallpaper and paint in long, ragged sheets, exposing the yellowed plaster and seams beneath. The house looked like it had been skinned alive. Yellow caution tape was strung across the front porch and the now empty window frames. A huge industrial dumpster was dropped in the driveway, blocking their minivan. They were trapped in a construction site. My masterstroke, however, was PR. I called a reporter from the local paper I knew from a charity board I sat on. I'm restoring my childhood home, I told her, pitching the story with practiced ease. It's a passion project. I want to honour my family's history while breathing new life into a place that holds a lot of painful memories. It's about transforming the past into a positive future investment for the community. The story ran the next day with a picture of me smiling in a hard hat in front of the taped-off house. The headline read, "Local investor honours family legacy through restoration." The public humiliation was swift and brutal. Neighbours, who had only ever seen the polished facade of the Ellis family, now saw the truth. They saw Carter's minivan trapped behind a dumpster. They saw Angela trying to sneak out for groceries, her face a mask of shame. One of the nosier neighbours, a teenager with a TikTok account, even started live streaming the daily progress, complete with dramatic music and captions like Ellis Family Drama Day 4. Carter and Angela were essentially prisoners in a decaying cage of their own making, their reputations being dismantled board by board. The power was shut off for safety reasons, then the water. I had every legal right. It was an active construction zone. They were living on takeout and bottled water, their perfect lives reduced to a public spectacle. One evening, my phone lit up with a text from Marley. "Can you tell me the truth? All of it? Mum and Dad just keep yelling." I met her at a coffee shop a few towns over. She looked small and lost, her eyes red from crying. She listened silently as I laid out the whole story. The pre-foreclosure, the purchase, our father's letter, the stolen lake house, the hidden addendum. I didn't embellish or editorialise. I just gave her the facts, supported by the documents I'd brought with me. "He was so proud of you," I said softly, showing her a copy of our father's letter. "He saw you, Marley, just like he saw me." And she traced his signature with her finger, tears rolling down her cheeks again. "I always thought they told me you were cold, that you didn't care about family. I cared so much I had to leave to survive," I told her. That night, as I pulled up to my condo, a figure stepped out of the shadows near my building's entrance. My hand immediately went for the pepper spray on my keychain. "Whoa, Hallie, it's me!" The voice was familiar, but I hadn't heard it in over 20 years. The man stepped under a streetlight and my breath hitched. Gage Riley, my high school boyfriend. The one my mother had hated with a fiery passion. The one she'd accused of ruining her daughter. At 43, he had laugh lines around his eyes and a touch of grey at his temples, but it was unmistakably him. "Gage? What are you doing here?" I asked, my heart pounding for a completely different reason now. "I saw the article about the house," he said, his expression serious. "And I saw the comments online, the videos. I figured it was time I told you something. Something I heard a long, long time ago." He took a deep breath. "It was the night of our senior prom. I came to pick you up and I was early. Your front door was ajar, and I heard your mum and Carter fighting inside. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help it. He was yelling at her about me, about you, and then he said it. He screamed, 'It's bad enough Dad insists on treating his bastard like she's a real daughter, but you don't have to let her throw her life away on some townie.' Gage looked at me, his eyes full of a sorrow 2 decades old. 'Your mum didn't deny it, Hallie. She just told him to shut up before you heard. I never knew what to do with that. I was just a kid, but I think you need to know. The way she treated you. It wasn't just because she favoured Carter. It was something else entirely.' Gage's words hung in the cool night air, rearranging every memory I had of my mother. His bastard. It wasn't just favouritism. It wasn't just that I was a girl. I was a living, breathing symbol of my father's infidelity. A constant, quiet reminder of a secret she had been forced to keep. My father hadn't overlooked me. He'd been trying to protect me. My mother hadn't just disliked me. She had actively, deeply hated me for a sin that wasn't even my own. And Carter. Carter had known. He'd used that secret as a weapon his entire life, wielding it to justify his entitlement, to poison my mother's mind against me, and to rationalise stealing what was rightfully mine. He believed he was the only legitimate heir. I thanked Gage, my voice a hollow echo of its usual self. I went inside my condo and sat in the dark for hours, letting the final, ugly piece of my family's puzzle click into place. The revelation wasn't a wound, it was a cauterization. It burned away the last lingering traces of doubt, the last microscopic hope that maybe I had misunderstood, that maybe they had loved me in their own dysfunctional way. They hadn't. It was that simple. The next morning, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. The emotional chains that had bound me to them for 38 years had finally rusted through and fallen away. There was nothing left to salvage, nothing left to mourn. There was only the end game. Instead of folding, I doubled down. Angela's empty threats of a lawsuit were a joke. I was the one with the power, the proof, and the righteous fury. I called Stacey. "File it all," I said. "Civil charges. Will tampering, property fraud, and I want to add slander for the public accusations they made at that dinner party." "Are you sure?" she asked, a hint of concern in her voice. This gets very public, very fast. Good, I said. Let everyone see. The legal battle was swift and brutal. Carter and Angela tried to countersue, claiming emotional distress and harassment. It was thrown out immediately. They were living in a house I owned, a house that was an active, permitted construction site. They had no legal leg to stand on. My case, however, was an ironclad fortress of documentation. The climax came not with a dramatic family confrontation, but in the sterile, quiet environment of a courtroom during a preliminary hearing. The local media, already hooked by the saga of the Restoration, was there in full force. I took the stand, calm and composed. My lawyer walked me through the evidence piece by piece. The pre-foreclosure notice, the deed to the house in my LLC's name. My father's letter, the unrecorded deed to the lake house, the labyrinthine documents for the trust and shell company Carter and Angela had created, and finally, Ernest's notarized copy of the will's addendum. When Carter's lawyer cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as a bitter, vengeful spinster. Isn't it true, Miss Ellis, that you were jealous of your brother's close relationship with your parents? I looked directly at the judge. My brother's relationship with our parents was based on lies and theft. I have no reason to be jealous of a fraud. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, had seen enough. She didn't even wait for a full trial. She issued a summary judgment in my favour on all counts. Carter was ordered to dissolve the trust and sign the lake house property over to me, effective immediately. He was found liable for tampering with the will, and the full $100,000 plus interest and my legal fees was to be paid to me from the estate's accounts. The public shame was absolute. The headlines the next day were merciless. Carter and Angela were forced to move out of the house on Willow Creek Lane, not into a new home, but into a small 2-bedroom rental apartment on the other side of town. There was nowhere to hide. Their friends stopped calling. The family who had sided with them now looked at them with contempt. They had lost everything: the house, the money, and the carefully constructed image they had spent their lives cultivating. They were left with nothing but the ugly truth of who they really were. The house on Willow Creek Lane was quiet now. The roar of saws and the pounding of hammers had been replaced by a deep, hollow silence. New hardwood floors gleamed where stained carpet once lay. The walls, now a calm, neutral grey, held no ghosts of old photographs. Kai's crew had been meticulous. They had gutted the house down to the studs and rebuilt it into something clean, modern, and utterly unrecognisable. It was beautiful. A perfect, sterile box with no memory. I stood on the new front porch, the key to the new lock feeling foreign in my hand. For weeks, I'd been consumed by the fight. The depositions, the paperwork, the demolition. Now that it was over, I was left standing in the silence of my victory, unsure of what to do with the spoils. Sell it? Rent it out? Burn it to the ground and salt the earth? All 3 options held a certain appeal. My phone buzzed. It was a photo of a letter sent from Stacey. The original had been delivered to her office, as per my instructions to block all mail from my family. The envelope was plain, the handwriting the familiar, looping script of a teenage girl. It was from Marley. I zoomed in on the image. Aunt Hallie. I'm sorry, not just for what my parents did, but for never trying to know you myself. I believed what they told me. I see now that they were the ones who were wrong. You were right about everything. I hope you find peace with the house. Someday, I hope we can talk again. Marley. I read it twice, then locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket. It wasn't an olive branch for the family. It was a white flag from a single tired soldier who was done with a war she hadn't started. It was more than I ever expected. The sound of footsteps on the new porch steps made me turn. It was Kai, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee from the place down the street. He handed one to me, his expression unreadable as he surveyed his handiwork. It turned out good, he said, taking a sip. It's perfect, I agreed. We stood there for a minute, the silence comfortable between us. He glanced over at me, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. Nice revenge. Expensive, huh? I knew he wasn't just talking about the renovation costs. He meant the time, the energy, the emotional toll of waging such a calculated war. He was right. It had cost me the last shred of any connection to the people who shared my blood. It had cost me years of my life I'd never get back. It was, I admitted, the coffee warming my hands, but it was worth it. I didn't do this for vengeance. Well, not only for vengeance. I did it because for 38 years my silence had been mistaken for weakness. My independence was called coldness. My refusal to play their games was labelled moody. They had spent my entire life writing a narrative for me, and I had finally picked up the pen and written my own ending. I did it so that silence wouldn't always mean defeat. The next day, I called my real estate agent. "List it," I said. "For full market value, not a penny less." The house sold in a week for over asking price. When the money cleared, I made 2 transfers. The first was to pay back every cent I had spent on the renovation and legal fees. The second, a substantial 6-figure sum, was a wire transfer. It was an anonymous donation to a national fund that provides legal aid and housing assistance for young women raised in abusive homes. I never stepped foot in that house again. I didn't need to. I had the lake house now, a quiet piece of land waiting for new blueprints. I had my business. I had my life, free of the ghosts of Willow Creek Lane. They begged me to stop, but they should have begged me to stay when I was still trying to belong.
The problem with being the designated responsible one in a family is that everyone eventually expects you to be responsible for them, too. My name is Meredith. I'm 29, I work as a medical administrator, and for the past year, my 1-bedroom apartment became a refuge, then a shared space, and finally, a prison of my own making. It all started 3 months ago with a phone call. I was just finishing up a spreadsheet when my phone buzzed with a picture of my sister, Tessa. I answered, and the sound that hit me was a gut-wrenching sob. "They fired me, Mer," she wailed. "They said I was late too many times, and then Mark broke up with me. He said he needed someone more stable." My sister, Tessa, is 24. She's the beautiful one, the one who can charm a room with a single smile, the one who has always been able to fall into a mess and land on her feet, usually cushioned by someone else. This time, the cushion was gone. She was being evicted from the apartment she shared with Mark, had no job, and her savings account was, as usual, a joke. I did what I always do. I fixed it. "Come stay with me," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I had a chance to think them through. "My place isn't huge, but you can have the couch until you get back on your feet. Take a month. Take 2. Just breathe." The relief in her voice was palpable. An hour later, my mother called. "Oh, Meredith, you are such a blessing to your sister," Vera gushed. "Your father and I were so worried. You have a good heart. You always have." It's funny how they only ever mention my good heart when it's being used in service of Tessa. The first 2 weeks were almost nice. It felt like a sleepover from when we were kids. She'd make us pasta for dinner, we'd watch bad reality TV, and she'd talk about her plans. She was going to get into graphic design, she said. Or maybe photography. She just needed time to find her passion. I was happy to give her that time. I paid the rent, I covered the groceries, I told her not to worry about a thing. Then the lines started to blur. It started small. I came home from work to find her wearing my favorite cashmere sweater, the one I saved for. A small, dark stain. Ketchup, maybe, was right on the cuff. "Oh, sorry," she'd said with a dazzling smile. "I was just borrowing it. I'll get it cleaned." She never did. Then the chores I'd asked her to handle, Just keeping the kitchen clean and taking out the trash started piling up. Dishes would sit in the sink for days, smelling sour. When I'd finally break down and wash them, she'd walk in as I was drying the last plate and say, "Oh, I was just about to do that! You didn't have to!" Her friends started appearing without notice. I'd come home from a 10-hour shift, desperate for silence, only to find two strangers I'd never met drinking my wine and listening to music on my speakers. Tessa would just laugh it off. "They're cool, Mer. Relax a little." I tried to tell myself it was temporary. She was hurting. She was lost. This was just a phase. I was being a good sister. That's what my parents kept telling me every Sunday on our weekly call. "How's our Tessa doing?" "It's so wonderful you're taking care of her." They never asked how I was doing. They just assumed I was fine. I was the responsible one after all. Last night I worked late. A system crash at the clinic meant I had to manually re-enter patient data for hours. I didn't get home until almost 10. All I wanted was a hot shower and my bed. I unlocked my door, exhaustion clinging to me like a wet coat, and stepped inside. The apartment was dark except for the flickering blue light of the TV. Sprawled on my couch, wearing nothing but a pair of basketball shorts, was a man I'd never seen before. He had messy brown hair and a half-hearted beard. He glanced over at me, not with surprise but with mild annoyance, as if I were the one interrupting. Hey," he said, his eyes not leaving the screen. I stood frozen in the doorway, my keys still in my hand. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" He finally turned his head, a lazy smirk on his face. Tessa was nowhere in sight. "I'm Sullivan," he said, as if that explained everything. "Tessa's boyfriend." He gestured vaguely toward my bedroom. "She's just in the shower." My mind raced. Boyfriend? She hadn't mentioned a new boyfriend. And what was he doing here, on my couch, acting like he lived here? I must have looked as confused as I felt, because he let out an exaggerated sigh and muted the TV. "Look," he said, sitting up. "Didn't Tessa tell you I moved in?" Moved in? The words hung in the air, thick and unbelievable. I stared at him, then at the closed bedroom door where my sister was showering, completely oblivious. "Tessa didn't mention anything about you moving in," I said, my voice tight. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door with a clatter that felt louder than it should have. Sullivan just shrugged, turning his attention back to the TV. "Yeah, well, things are getting pretty serious." Just then, the bedroom door opened and Tessa emerged, wrapped in one of my good towels, her hair dripping onto my hardwood floor. She beamed when she saw me. "Mer, you're home. Did you meet Sully?" "He told me he moved in," I said, keeping my tone flat. Her smile didn't falter. She breezed past me, kissing Sullivan on the forehead. "Oh, yeah. Isn't it great? His lease was up and it just made sense. We were going to tell you tonight over dinner, make it a whole thing." A whole thing. As if my consent was a fun little surprise to be revealed, not a prerequisite. I felt a familiar wave of exhaustion wash over me. I was too tired to fight. Not tonight. "Okay," I mumbled, heading for the kitchen. "I'm just going to grab some water." That night, I slept on the couch. They'd taken my bed, and the thought of asking them to move was more than I could handle. I told myself it was just for one night. It wasn't. Over the next 2 weeks, Sullivan became a permanent, deeply unwelcome fixture in my life. His presence was like a stain, spreading into every corner of my small apartment. His giant, smelly sneakers were always by the door. His video game console was hooked up to my TV, its cables a tangled mess behind the stand. He even changed my Netflix profile name from Meredith to the landlord. He thought it was hilarious. The worst part was the smoking. I have a strict no-smoking rule in my apartment. It's in my lease and it's a personal preference. But every evening I'd find him out on my tiny balcony, puffing away, the acrid smell drifting back into the living room. When I first brought it up, Tessa jumped to his defense. "He's on the balcony, Mare, not inside," she'd said, rolling her eyes. "It's practically outdoors. Don't be so dramatic." My home no longer felt like my own. It was a shared dorm room where I was the only one paying rent. The quiet evenings I used to cherish were replaced by the constant noise of Sullivan's video games or the low murmur of their arguments filtering through my bedroom door, the door to the room I was now paying for them to occupy. I started staying later at work, finding excuses to avoid going home. My co-workers noticed. "You look exhausted," Yusuf said one day as we ate lunch in the break room. Yusuf is a data analyst at the clinic, a calm, observant man with kind eyes. We'd become friends over the past year, bonding over our shared love for ridiculously complex board games. I picked up my salad. "Just some stuff at home." "The sister stuff?" he asked gently. I finally broke. The whole story came pouring out of me. Tessa, the broken promises, and now Sullivan, the uninvited tenant who treated my home like a frat house. Yusuf listened patiently, not interrupting once. When I was done, he didn't offer easy platitudes. He just looked at me and said, "So what are you going to do?" "What can I do?" I sighed. "She's my sister. My parents would kill me if I kicked her out." "It's your name on the lease, Meredith," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "It's your sanctuary. You're allowed to protect it." He leaned forward slightly. "Just because they're family doesn't mean they get a free pass to disrespect you." His words echoed in my head all afternoon. He was right. I needed to set boundaries, firm ones. That night, I walked home with a renewed sense of purpose. I was going to talk to them. I was going to lay down the law. No more smoking, a chore chart, and a serious discussion about him contributing to bills. I rehearsed the speech in my head, but when I got home, the apartment was quiet. A note was on the counter. "Went out for dinner. Be back late. XOXO. T." A part of me was relieved. The confrontation was postponed. I enjoyed the silence, tidied up the living room, and went to bed early, sleeping in my own bed for the first time in weeks. I fell asleep, feeling a sliver of hope. That hope was shattered at 2 a.m. I was jolted awake by a deep, rhythmic thumping that vibrated through my mattress. It took me a moment to place the sound. Music. Loud, bass-heavy music. Confused, I slipped out of bed and crept toward the living room. The door was closed, but I could see colored lights flashing in the crack underneath. I opened the door and froze. My living room was packed with at least 15 strangers, dancing and shouting over the music. Empty beer cans littered my coffee table, and in the middle of it all, Sullivan was at my laptop, playing DJ, while Tessa laughed and danced with some guy I'd never seen before. It wasn't a gathering. It was a full-blown party. In my apartment. On a Tuesday. My rage was a quiet, cold thing. I didn't storm into the living room and start screaming. I just stood in the doorway, taking in the scene of my home being violated, and then I turned around, went back to my bedroom, my former bedroom, now a guest room on the rare occasions they let me use it, and closed the door. I waited. The music finally died down around 4 a.m. The next morning, I was up at 6. I methodically cleaned up the mess. I gathered a full trash bag of empty cans and bottles, wiped the sticky rings from my coffee table, and found a cigarette butt floating in a half-empty glass of water. The whole apartment smelled like stale beer and regret. By the time Tessa and Sullivan stumbled out of my bedroom around 10, the place was spotless. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, my laptop open. I didn't look up. "Morning," Tessa mumbled, squinting against the light. Sullivan grunted and went straight for the fridge, pulling out my orange juice and drinking from the carton. "We need to talk," I said, my voice dangerously calm. Tessa sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. If this is about last night, we're sorry. It just kind of happened." "It didn't just happen, Tessa. You planned a party in my home without telling me. You let strangers drink my alcohol and trash my living room." "And Sullivan?" I said, finally looking at him. "You were smoking in here. I could smell it on the curtains." He shrugged, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "It was just a few drags, man. Relax." "No," I said, my voice gaining an edge. "I will not relax. This is my home. My name is on the lease. I pay every single bill. That means I make the rules. And the rules are no parties, no smoking, and you," I pointed a finger at Sullivan, "start contributing to rent and utilities if you're going to live here." That's when the tears started. Tessa's face crumpled, her lower lip trembling. "I can't believe you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm trying so hard to get my life together, and you're throwing money in my face? I thought you were helping me because you loved me, not so you could hold it over my head." "This isn't about holding it over your head. It's about basic respect," I shot back, my composure finally cracking. "Respect?" she cried, now full-on sobbing. "You're trying to control me. You've always been like this. You get one little thing right in your life and you think you can dictate how everyone else lives. You're just so ungrateful." Ungrateful. The word hit me like a slap. I was ungrateful for cleaning up their mess, for paying for the roof over their heads. The absurdity of it left me speechless. Sullivan put his arm around her, glaring at me as he led her back into the bedroom, whispering comforting words. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the silence of my own kitchen. The next day, my phone rang at work. It was my mother. "Meredith, I just got off the phone with your sister," Vera began, her voice dripping with disappointment. "She was hysterical. How could you be so cruel to her?" I tried to explain about the party, about Sullivan, about the complete lack of boundaries. She cut me off. "She's your sister, and she's going through a hard time," Vera said sharply. "She needs support, not a drill sergeant. Your father and I are very disappointed in your selfishness, Meredith. We raised you to be better than that." The call ended with me staring at my phone, a cold realization dawning on me. It didn't matter what they did. In my family's court of opinion, Tessa was the victim, and I was the villain. I was the cold, unfeeling one for asking for the bare minimum of respect. I told Yusuf about it over lunch. He listened, his expression thoughtful. "My grandmother used to say something," he said after a moment. Just because they love you doesn't mean they won't use you. The words landed with a quiet, devastating accuracy. That was it. That was the whole dynamic. They loved me in the way you love a reliable appliance. You only notice it when it stops working. That night, I came home determined to try one last time. Maybe if I was calmer, if I framed it differently. I found them sitting on the couch, waiting for me. They had serious expressions on their faces. "Mer, sit down," Tessa said, patting the cushion next to her. "We need to talk to you about something." I sat, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Tessa took a deep breath, looking at Sullivan for support. He gave her a little nod. "Sully and I have been talking," she began, her tone gentle, as if she were about to break bad news to a child. "And we feel like our relationship is getting really serious. We need our own space to grow as a couple, for privacy." I stared at her, confused. "You have your own space. You have my bedroom." Sullivan cleared his throat. "Yeah, about that," he said. "The little room is fine, but it's cramped. And it's right next to the living room where you are all the time." Tessa leaned forward, her eyes wide and earnest. "So, we've decided we need the master bedroom." It took a second for the words to register. The master bedroom. My apartment only had one bedroom, the one they were already in. I don't understand," I stammered. "What are you talking about?" Tessa smiled, a patient, condescending little smile. "It's okay. We figured it all out. You can take the little bedroom, and we'll take the master. It's bigger, and it'll give us the privacy we need." She wasn't talking about a different apartment. She was talking about mine. She was demoting me from the couch to... Wait. My apartment didn't have a second bedroom. "There is no little bedroom, Tessa," I said slowly. "The one you're in," Sullivan clarified, pointing toward my bedroom door. "We need that one." They wanted my bedroom, and they expected me to sleep on the couch. Permanently. I think I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, incredulous sound. "You can't be serious." "We are," Sullivan said, his expression hardening. "We need a real room, Meredith. A door that closes. It's a respect thing." The sheer audacity of him mentioning respect left me breathless. "You want my bedroom? The room in the apartment that I pay for? And you want me to sleep on the couch indefinitely?" "Don't be so dramatic," Tessa said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's not a big deal. You're barely even here anyway. You're always at work." It was the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. In their minds, I wasn't a person who lived here. I was the financial engine that kept the place running, a background character in the story of their great romance. My comfort, my privacy, my ownership, none of it mattered. "No," I said, the word feeling solid and heavy in my mouth. "Absolutely not. This is my bedroom." "You are staying on the couch where you started." Tessa's face hardened. The soft, manipulative victim was gone, replaced by a petulant stranger. "Fine. Be that way." The next day, I came home from work to find them in the middle of it. They were moving my things. My clothes were in a heap on the living room floor. My nightstand was already in the corner by the couch, my lamp still plugged in, its cord stretched taut across the walkway. They were dragging my mattress out of the bedroom. "What are you doing?" I yelled, dropping my bag. We told you we needed the room, Sullivan said, grunting as he and Tessa maneuvered the mattress through the doorway. You didn't listen, so we're just doing it. I ran forward and grabbed the edge of the mattress, trying to pull it back. Get out of my room! This is my room! Stop being so dramatic, Meredith! Tessa shrieked, her voice shrill. God, you're making this such a big deal! We stood there, in a pathetic tug-of-war over my own bed in my own hallway. They were stronger. They wrenched it from my grasp and pushed it against the living room wall. Desperate, I pulled out my phone. I called my mom. I thought, surely this is the line. This is the point where they will see how insane this is. I put the phone on speaker, my hands shaking with rage. Mom, I said, my voice trembling. Tessa and Sullivan are trying to take my bedroom. They're moving my bed into the living room. I could hear Vera sigh on the other end of the line. Meredith, please, I spoke to your sister this morning. She's trying to build a life with this young man. Can't you be supportive for once? She needs a stable environment. A stable environment? In my apartment? By kicking me out of my own room? It sounds to me like you're being jealous, my mother said, her voice turning cold. Tessa is finally happy, and you're trying to ruin it. You have a good job and a nice apartment. Why can't you share a little of that with your sister who has nothing? I couldn't speak. The betrayal was a physical thing, a punch to the gut that knocked all the air out of me. I looked at Tessa, who was watching me with a smug, triumphant expression. She had won. She always won. Your mother is right. My father's voice chimed in faintly in the background. Just let her have the room, Meredith. It's easier. It's easier. For them. For everyone but me. I hung up the phone. I didn't say another word. I watched them move their cheap duffel bags and boxes into my room. I watched Sullivan hook up his video game console to the small TV on my dresser. I watched Tessa arrange her makeup on my vanity. That night, I lay on my mattress, which was now crammed between the couch and the coffee table. The springs dug into my back. I could hear them laughing in my bedroom. I could hear the muffled sounds of my television playing a show I didn't recognize. I pulled my blanket up to my chin, and the tears I had been holding back, finally, came. They were hot, silent tears of pure, undiluted rage. I cried for the girl who always tried to do the right thing. I cried for the daughter who was never good enough. I cried for the sister who was nothing more than a doormat. I lay there, in the dark, in the ruins of my own home, and I let myself feel all of it. The humiliation, the helplessness, the fury. And then, something inside me went very, very quiet. The tears stopped. The shaking subsided. It was like a switch had been flipped in a dark room, and suddenly I could see everything with perfect, crystal clarity. I had been trying to reason with unreasonable people. I had been trying to get respect from people who were incapable of giving it. I had been waiting for my family to save me when they were the ones holding me underwater. I wasn't going to be the martyr anymore. I wasn't going to be the bigger person. I was done playing their game by their rules. The next morning, I got up from the mattress on the floor. Tessa and Sullivan were still asleep in my bed. I walked past the closed bedroom door, went into the kitchen, and made myself a coffee. As I stood there, looking out the window at the rising sun, a slow smile spread across my face. It probably looked terrifying. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had won. I stopped fighting. I just smiled and said, "You're right. That's when they should have worried. The shift in my demeanor was so complete that it seemed to unnerve them. I stopped arguing. I stopped complaining. When Tessa came out of the bedroom that morning, yawning, she eyed me cautiously as I sat on the couch, sipping my coffee. "Morning," she said, her tone hesitant. "Morning," I replied, giving her a small, placid smile. "Did you sleep well?" She was visibly taken aback. Yeah. The bed's really comfortable." "Good. I'm glad." My compliance was a weapon they didn't understand. For the next 2 days, I was the perfect roommate. I didn't mention the mess in the kitchen. I didn't say a word when Sullivan left his wet towel on the floor. I just moved through the apartment like a ghost, my presence quiet and unobtrusive. They mistook my silence for surrender. They thought they had finally beaten me into submission. They'd see me packing a box with some books and winter clothes and would just smirk at each other. They thought I was being dramatic, slowly moving my things out of their way. What I was actually doing was planning. On Monday, I took my lunch break and walked 2 blocks over to the property management office that handled my building. It was a sterile beige room with fluorescent lighting. I sat down across the desk from my landlord, a man in his 40s named Mr. Chapman. He was a no-nonsense guy who I'd only ever interacted with to renew my lease or report a leaky faucet. "Meredith," he said, looking up from his computer. "Everything all right with the apartment?" "Everything is fine, Mr. Chapman," I said, my voice even and professional. "I'm actually here to give my 30-day notice. I've found a new place and will be terminating my lease." He looked surprised. "Oh. Well, I'm sorry to see you go. You've been a model tenant." He pulled up my file. "So your move-out date will be 30 days from today." "Actually," I said, leaning forward slightly, "I was hoping to arrange an early termination. I'm willing to pay any associated fees, of course." I paused, letting the offer hang in the air. "There's just one complication I need your help with." I explained the situation. I was careful with my words, framing it not as a family drama, but as a legal issue. I told him my sister had been staying with me temporarily, and that her boyfriend, an individual not on the lease, had subsequently moved in without my consent. "They've become disruptive," I said, choosing the word carefully. "And they are now refusing to leave." Mr. Chapman's expression went from professional to concerned. He typed something into his computer, his brow furrowed. "Unauthorized occupants. That's a clear violation of your lease agreement, Meredith." Clause 14b. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here. I want to handle this by the book." Over the next hour, he walked me through the process. It was surprisingly straightforward. Because my lease was being terminated, and because Tessa and Sullivan were not legal tenants, they had no right to occupy the property. They weren't tenants to be evicted. They were unauthorized occupants who needed to be removed. The law was on my side. I spent the rest of my lunch break preparing. I went to a print shop and made copies of my lease agreement. I went through my phone and printed out screenshots of text messages, Tessa asking to stay for just a couple of weeks, my polite requests for Sullivan to stop smoking on the balcony, her dismissive replies. I took photos of the state of the apartment, the overflowing trash, the video game console wired into my wall, my mattress shoved into the living room. I created a timeline, documenting the date Sullivan moved in and every subsequent boundary violation. It was a cold, meticulous little file of betrayal. That evening, I quietly continued packing. I gathered my essentials, work clothes, toiletries, important documents, my laptop. I packed the sentimental things, photos of my grandparents, a set of teacups my aunt gave me, my favorite books. I moved with a calm, deliberate purpose. Tessa and Sullivan watched me from the couch, eating takeout from my favorite Thai place. "Still packing up your little protest boxes?" Sullivan sneered around a mouthful of noodles. I just smiled. "Something like that." The next morning, I went back to Mr. Chapman's office before work. I signed the official lease termination agreement. The fee was steep, 1 full month's rent, but it was a price I was more than willing to pay for my freedom. My official tenancy would end in 3 days, on Friday at noon. Mr. Chapman slid a formal-looking document across the desk toward me. It was a notice to vacate for unauthorized occupants. It was addressed to all occupants at my address, and it clearly stated that the legal tenant, Meredith Lowe, had terminated her lease, and that any and all unauthorized persons had 72 hours to vacate the premises before they would be considered trespassers. "I'll have this delivered today," Mr. Chapman said, his tone all business. "It will be posted on the door and a copy slipped underneath. Standard procedure." "Thank you, Mr. Chapman," I said, standing up and shaking his hand. "I appreciate your help." "Just doing my job," he said. "Good luck with the move, Meredith." I walked out of that office and into the bright morning sun, feeling lighter than I had in months. The plan was in motion. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for them to walk into it. They'll be informed tomorrow, I thought. But the notice would be delivered today. They'd find it when they woke up. I left for work extra early that morning, before the sun was fully up. I didn't want to be there when the notice arrived. I wanted the silence of my car, the routine of my job, the sterile predictability of my office to be my shield for the day. I put my phone on silent and buried it in my purse. The call started around 9:30 a.m. I could see the screen light up from the corner of my eye. First Tessa, then Sullivan, then Tessa again, over and over. Then came the texts, a rapid-fire barrage of question marks and angry accusations. I ignored them all. I focused on my work, my fingers flying across the keyboard, each keystroke a tiny, satisfying act of defiance. At lunch, I finally checked my messages. Tessa. What is this? Tessa. There's an eviction notice on the door, Meredith. This isn't funny. Tessa. Call me right now. Sullivan. You crazy bitch! What did you do? Sullivan. My buddy is a lawyer. You can't just kick us out. I took a calm sip of my tea. Let him call his lawyer Buddy. Any lawyer worth his salt would tell him the same thing. With no lease and no rent payments, they weren't tenants. They were guests whose welcome had expired. I drove home at my usual time, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. As I walked down the hallway to my apartment, I could hear them shouting inside. I took a deep breath, slid my key into the lock, and opened the door. The scene was pure chaos. Tessa was pacing the living room, her hair a mess, her face blotchy from crying. Sullivan was on the phone, yelling into it. My neatly packed boxes were torn open, their contents strewn across the floor. They had been looking for something, probably a copy of the lease. They both froze when they saw me. There she is, Sullivan snarled, hanging up the phone. What the hell did you do? He brandished the official notice in his hand. I terminated my lease, I said simply, setting my purse down on the kitchen counter. Tessa's head snapped toward me. You what? You can't do that. Where are we supposed to go? I don't know, Tessa, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. That sounds like a you and Sullivan problem. It's no longer a Meredith problem. This is our home, she shrieked. No, I corrected her, my voice cutting through her hysteria. This was my home. My name is on the lease. My money pays the rent. You were guests, and your stay is over. Sullivan stepped forward, puffing out his chest. You can't just throw us out on the street. We have rights. Actually, you don't, I said, pulling my own copy of the lease from my purse, along with the termination agreement. You are unauthorized occupants, according to this legally binding document, and the notice Mr. Chapman posted on the door. You have until Friday at noon to remove yourselves and your belongings. After that, you will be trespassing. The color drained from his face. He looked from the papers in my hand to my face, searching for a sign of weakness, a flicker of doubt. He found none. Tessa's tactic changed. The anger dissolved back into tears. Please, she sobbed, her voice thick with desperation. Don't do this to us. We have nowhere to go. We'll be homeless. A year ago, even a week ago, those words would have shattered me. I would have caved, apologized, and found a way to fix it. But I just looked at her, at the sister who had used my kindness as a weapon against me, and I felt nothing. The well of my sympathy had run dry. You should call Mom and Dad, I suggested calmly. I'm sure they'll help you. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and then narrowed with fury. I will, she spat, and you're going to regret this. They will never forgive you. I'm counting on it, I said. An hour later, my mother showed up. She didn't knock. She used the emergency key I'd given her years ago and stormed in, my father trailing silently behind her. Vera's face was a mask of righteous fury. Meredith Lowe, what is the meaning of this? She demanded, her voice echoing in the small apartment. You are throwing your own sister out on the street? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Hello, Mother. As you can see, I'm moving. My lease is terminated. You did this out of spite, she accused, pointing a trembling finger at me. Out of jealousy, because your sister is finally building a happy life. A happy life built on my couch, in my bedroom, with my money, I said, my voice like ice. She had a choice. She could have treated me with a shred of respect. She chose not to, and I am choosing to remove myself from the situation. This is your family, she yelled. I took a step closer to her, my gaze unwavering. I looked past her, at my father who was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at Tessa, who was hiding behind her mother like a child. And then I looked back at Vera. This is not your home, I said, the words clear and final. It never was. You have no say here. You need to leave. For the first time in my life, my mother looked at me and had no response. She saw something in my eyes she had never seen before, at the boundary. A solid, unmovable wall. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Defeated, she turned and stormed out, dragging my father with her. Tessa gave me one last look, a mixture of hatred and fear, before following them out the door, slamming it behind her. The silence they left behind was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The next 48 hours were a strange, tense truce. Tessa and Sullivan were ghosts in the apartment, speaking only in whispers behind the closed door of their bedroom. They were packing. I could hear the scrape of boxes and the rustle of bags. They avoided me completely. If I was in the kitchen, they stayed in the room. If I was in the living room, the door remained shut. The air was thick with unspoken resentment. I didn't care. I used the time to finish my own packing, taping up the last of the boxes and labeling them with a black marker. I arranged for movers to come Friday morning. I transferred the utilities out of my name. Each small administrative task was a step toward freedom. On Thursday evening, the night before the deadline, I decided to cook one last meal in my kitchen. It felt symbolic. I made a simple pasta with roasted vegetables, the kind of comfort food I used to make for myself after a long week. The apartment filled with the smell of garlic and basil. I ate my dinner sitting on a cardboard box in the living room, surrounded by the neatly stacked evidence of my departure. I could hear them arguing in the bedroom. Their voices were muffled, but the tone was clear, panicked and accusatory. Their grand romance, built on a foundation of my generosity, was crumbling under the first hint of pressure. A part of me, a small, wounded part, felt a pang of sadness. This was my sister. We had grown up together, shared secrets and holidays, and 1,000 inside jokes. I had loved her fiercely, protectively. How had we gotten here? How had the threads of family become so tangled with entitlement and disrespect? But the sadness was fleeting, washed away by a stronger, clearer emotion. Relief. I was finally choosing myself. I was prioritizing my own peace over their comfort. The guilt I had carried for so long, the crushing weight of familial obligation, was gone. In its place was a quiet, steady resolve. This hurt. It hurt more than I could have imagined, but it was a clean pain, a necessary amputation to save the rest of me. Revenge didn't feel triumphant. It felt like surgery. They finally emerged from the bedroom around 9 o'clock. They looked exhausted and defeated. Their few belongings were piled by the door in trash bags and a couple of beat-up suitcases. "We called our parents," Tessa said, her voice flat. She wouldn't look at me. "We're going to stay with them for a while." "Okay," I said. Sullivan just glared at me from across the room, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked smaller, less intimidating, without the bravado. "You can take the couch tonight," I offered, gesturing with my fork. "My movers will be here at 8 a.m. The apartment needs to be empty by noon." They didn't argue. They just nodded, took some blankets from the linen closet, and set up a makeshift bed on the couch. We didn't speak another word to each other that night. I slept on my mattress on the floor one last time, the sound of their breathing filling the quiet space. The next morning, I was up before them. The movers arrived precisely at 8. They were efficient and professional, clearing out my life's possessions in under an hour. As they carried the last box out, I stood in the empty living room. It looked vast and impersonal. Tessa was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, watching me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I'll never forgive you for this, Meredith," she said, her voice a low, trembling whispers. "You've ruined everything." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw a scared, lost 24-year-old who had never been forced to stand on her own 2 feet. I had been her safety net for so long that she'd forgotten how to fall. Maybe this was the cruelest kindness I could ever offer her, cutting the net. "I know," I said. I picked up my purse and my box of essentials. I walked to the door, my footsteps echoing in the empty apartment. I didn't look back until I was standing in the hallway. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and took one last look at the place that had been my home. And then, my prison. Tessa was weeping now, her face buried in her hands. Sullivan was staring blankly at the wall, his phone in his hand, probably trying to find someone else to leech off of. A cold, hard thought settled in my mind. I had done what I needed to do. I had drawn the line. I had taken back my life. What happened to them now was not my responsibility. I turned back once for a last look and whispered to the empty air, "Let karma finish what I started." Then I closed the door, and I walked away. I moved into a small studio apartment across town. It's half the size of my old place, with a kitchen that's little more than a glorified hallway and a view of a brick wall. But it's mine. The silence in it is absolute. It's a clean, quiet, empty space that belongs only to me. That first night, I slept on an air mattress on the floor, surrounded by boxes. I slept for 10 solid hours, deeper than I had in a year. The fallout was exactly what I expected. My mother and father haven't spoken to me since that day in the apartment. My calls go straight to voicemail. My texts are left unread. I know from a cousin that Tessa and Sullivan did, in fact, move back into my parents' house, taking over Tessa's childhood bedroom. The dynamic has simply been transferred, not fixed. I am, for all intents and purposes, disowned. I thought it would hurt more, but the truth is, the family I was mourning was one that never really existed. I was mourning the idea of their unconditional love, not the reality of their conditional support. The silence from them isn't a punishment, it's a consequence. My own. Last Saturday, Yusuf came over to help me paint. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor, surrounded by drop cloths and cans of paint the colour of a calm sea. "How are you, really?" he asked, taking a bite of pizza. "I'm okay," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "It's quiet, too quiet sometimes, but it's a good quiet." "You did the right thing, Meredith," he said, his voice gentle. "It was the hard thing, but it was the right thing." "I know." I looked around at the half-painted walls of my new, small life. I keep waiting to feel guilty, or to miss them, but I just feel peaceful. I blocked their numbers a week ago. All of them, Vera, Truman, Tessa. It felt less like an act of anger and more like an act of housekeeping, like unsubscribing from junk mail. It was a simple, necessary step to protect my own peace. The drama, the guilt trips, the endless cycle of expectation and disappointment. I was finally free of it. This new life is smaller, more private. I'm less trusting, perhaps. The part of me that was always ready to jump in and fix things has been cauterized. I've learned that some fires are not mine to put out. Karma, for me, was never about making them pay. It was about finally refusing to pay their debts for them. I didn't want them to suffer. I just wanted to stop being the source of their comfort at the expense of my own. I thought revenge would feel like fire, a hot, satisfying blaze that would burn all the hurt away. But for me, it felt like silence. The silence of my phone not ringing with another demand. The The silence of my apartment, empty of uninvited guests. The silence of a future where I am the only one I have to answer to. It's a quiet, profound victory, one that doesn't require an audience. This morning, I was clearing out my email spam folder when I saw a message that had been filtered through. It was from my father. I almost deleted it without a second thought, my thumb hovering over the trash icon. But the subject line stopped me. It just said, "Can we talk?" I stared at the words for a long time. I thought about all the things he could want. Maybe my mother had put him up to it, another attempt to guilt me back into line. Maybe Tessa and Sullivan had finally worn out their welcome at home, and they needed me to be the responsible one again. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something else. Maybe it was the quiet plea of a man who had spent his life echoing his wife's opinions and was, for the first time, trying to find his own voice. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if I'll reply. The old Meredith would have answered immediately, her heart leaping with the hope of reconciliation. The new Meredith knows that some doors, once closed, are best left that way. For now, I just leave the email sitting there, unread. The choice of whether to open it is mine. And for the first time in a very long time, that feels like more than enough.
The silence is the first thing you notice. It's a heavy, suffocating thing that has settled over the house like a layer of dust. It clings to the half-painted walls of what was supposed to be the nursery, a soft, pale yellow that now just looks sickly in the dim morning light. A flat-packed crib still sits in its box in the corner, and a mobile of felt stars and a moon hangs perfectly still over a space that will remain empty. My name is Andrea. I'm 32 years old. And exactly 1 week ago, the tiny, flickering heartbeat I'd watched on a screen for months just stopped. After 4 years, 3 rounds of IVF, and more debt than I care to admit, it was over. The silence in this room is the sound of my world ending. The doorbell rings, a shrill, unwelcome intrusion. I already know who it is. My mother, Peyton, and my younger sister, Savannah, don't call before they show up. They arrive expecting the door to be open. I pull on a robe and head downstairs. When I open the door, my mother is already smoothing down her perfectly tailored blazer. At 59, she looks impeccable, not a single silver hair out of place. Beside her, Savannah, who is 26, is scrolling through her phone, a tiny frown on her face. "Andrea, darling," my mother says, her voice a carefully constructed performance of sympathy. She steps inside and gives me an awkward, one-armed hug that smells of expensive perfume and hairspray. "We wanted to see how you were holding up." Savannah looks up from her phone just long enough to mumble, "Hey," before her eyes are drawn back to the screen. "The calligrapher just sent the proofs for the invitations. I think the font is a little too curly." My mother shoots her a look, a silent command that Savannah ignores. Peyton turns back to me, her expression softening into something she probably thinks is maternal. "We know this is a difficult time, but we have to keep moving forward." "It's important to have something happy to focus on, don't you think?" I just nod, my throat too tight to speak. I lead them into the living room, where stacks of unopened baby gifts serve as a painful monument to what I've lost. A rocking horse with a cheerful, painted-on smile. A pile of tiny onesies. My mother's eyes scan the room and land on them, her lips thinning in disapproval. "You should really clear all this out, Andrea," she says, her tone shifting from sympathetic to practical. "It's not healthy to dwell." Before I can respond, she sits on the edge of the sofa, all business. Which brings us to why we're here. We need to have a family meeting about the wedding. Of course, Savannah's wedding to her wealthy fiancé, Wyatt, is in 2 months. It's all anyone in our family has talked about for the last year. My lost pregnancy was just a brief, inconvenient intermission. "The venue costs came in higher than we expected," Peyton continues, her voice smooth as glass. And Savannah has her heart set on the floral arrangements from that boutique designer in the city. It's all about the details, you know. I stare at her, a cold dread creeping into the numbness. I know where this is going. Your sister's wedding is a major family event, she says, her eyes locking onto mine. It's a reflection on all of us. And as a family, we have a responsibility to support each other. Savannah finally puts her phone down. Mom's right. We all have to pitch in to make this day perfect. I remain silent. I've already pitched in. I've spent the last decade pitching in, playing the dutiful older sister and daughter, swallowing my own needs to make theirs a priority. Peyton leans forward, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. That piece of land your grandmother left you, it's just sitting there unused. If you sold it, the money would more than cover the wedding overages. It would be your contribution. A beautiful, generous gift to your only sister. The land, the one thing that was truly mine. A quiet, 5-acre meadow my grandmother left me in her will, a place she knew I loved. It was my escape, my sanctuary. The thought of it being bulldozed to pay for imported flowers and a champagne fountain makes me physically sick. I I don't know, I managed to say, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. Grandma wanted me to keep it. Peyton's mask of concern slips, revealing the cold, hard impatience beneath. She sighs, a sound full of manufactured disappointment. Andrea, let's be practical. What are you going to do with it? Build a house for a family you don't have? The cruelty of the words hits me like a slap. I flinch and she presses her advantage. It's just land. A baby can be replaced. You can try again, but your sister only gets one wedding day. This is her dream. A baby can be replaced. The phrase echoes in the silent house in the empty nursery upstairs. All the air leaves my lungs. I look from my mother's unyielding face to my sister's, who is now looking at her nails, completely unbothered. In that moment, something inside me, something that had been soft and hopeful for years, finally calcified into something hard and cold. I take a slow, deliberate breath. I look my mother in the eye, my expression as blank as I can make it. Okay, I say, my voice flat. I'll sign it over. A triumphant smile breaks across Peyton's face. Savannah looks up, beaming. Oh my God, Andy, really? Thank you. I hold up a hand, stopping her celebration short. But not yet, I say, the words coming easily now. I'll sign the papers and give you the deed after the wedding, as my gift. After they left, the silence they'd broken rushed back in, heavier than before. For 2 days, I didn't leave the house. I moved from the couch to the bed and back again, the unopened gifts in the living room mocking me. My mother's words, a baby can be replaced, played on a loop in my head, each repetition chipping away at something vital inside me. On the third day, I couldn't stand it anymore. I got in my car and drove, not to my parents' house or the grocery store, but to the one place that felt like mine. The memory hit me as soon as I turned onto the gravel access road. I was 16, sitting in the passenger seat of my grandmother's old boat-like Buick. She'd parked right here, in this exact spot, and turned off the engine. Look at it, Andy, she'd said, her voice warm and crinkly like old paper. Your mother sees dirt. Your sister sees an investment. What do you see? I looked out at the 5 acres of untouched meadow, a swath of green and gold wildness bordered by a line of old oak trees. On the other side of those trees was my parents' neighborhood, a place of manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. But here, it was beautifully untamed. I see a place to breathe, I'd told her. She had smiled, a genuine, deep in the eyes smile that my mother never managed. That's why it's going to be yours one day. Some people see land as something to own. I see it as something to protect. Your mother and sister, they don't protect things, they consume them. She'd known even then. She saw the way they treated me, the quiet erosion of my confidence under their constant demands and subtle dismissals. She left me the land in her will not just as an inheritance, but as a shield. Now, standing in the middle of that field, the tall grass brushing against my jeans, I could feel her presence. The air was clean, the only sounds the buzz of insects and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. This was my sanctuary, the place I'd dreamed of building a small house with a garden and a swing set, a place for the family I was so desperate to have. The thought sent a familiar pang of grief through my chest, sharp and debilitating. I sank to the ground, wrapping my arms around my knees. Selling this place to fund Savannah's vanity project felt like a second, deeper betrayal. It wasn't just land, it was my grandmother's faith in me. It was the last piece of my own future. I stayed there for hours until the sun started to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. As I was walking back to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from a courier service. Your package from S. Wright has been delivered. When I got home, a thick, glossy white folder was propped against my front door. It was tied with an obnoxious satin ribbon in Savannah's chosen wedding color, a dusty rose. My name was written on the front in perfect looping calligraphy. Inside, there was no note, just a multi page, professionally printed booklet titled Wyatt and Savannah, A Dream Come True. It was the wedding budget. I flipped through the pages, my stomach clenching tighter with each line item. Venue rental, $45,000 catering, 200 guests, $38,000 floral, designer, $22,000 custom gown and alterations, $15,000 artisanal, ice sculptor, $3,500 dove release, coordinator, $1,200. The list went on and on, a grotesque monument to my sister's entitlement. The grand total at the bottom was a staggering $187,000. My mother had said the land would cover the overages. This wasn't an overage. This was the entire cost of the spectacle. They wanted me to sacrifice my entire inheritance, my one piece of security, for a party, for ice sculptures and a flock of birds. I dropped the folder on the coffee table, the slick pages fanning out. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They hadn't even bothered to ask politely. They'd just sent the bill. My eyes drifted to the bookshelf, to the collection of framed photos I kept there. Tucked in the back was one of my grandmother. It was from years ago, before I was even born. She was younger, her hair dark, standing behind a table at some sort of charity event. She was laughing, holding a sign. I picked it up, wiping a thin layer of dust from the glass. In the photo, she wasn't posing for the camera. She was smiling at someone just out of frame, her expression full of life and purpose. The sign she was holding was for a fundraiser. I squinted to read the elegant, hand painted letters at the top. Haven House. Annual Gala. Building a safe haven for women and children. The week that followed was a masterclass in my mother's brand of quiet manipulation. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Mrs. Gable from down the street. Her face lit up with a pitying smile. Andrea, dear, I was so sorry to hear about your troubles, she said, patting my arm. But your mother told me the most wonderful news, that you're gifting your land to Savannah for the wedding. What a selfless, generous sister you are. It's just what this family needs, a little joy to focus on. I just smiled and nodded, the words catching in my throat. My mother wasn't just pressuring me, she was creating a public narrative, one where I was the benevolent, doting sister, and my contribution was a willing sacrifice for the family's happiness. She was boxing me in, making it impossible for me to back out without looking cruel and selfish to the entire community. By the time I got home, the numbness had been replaced by a slow, burning anger. I walked into my home office, a small room I'd converted from a spare bedroom, and sat down at my desk. For the past 4 years, this room had been my command center for Project Baby. It was where I tracked ovulation cycles, researched fertility clinics, and paid the endless stream of medical bills. I opened the file drawer and pulled out a thick accordion folder labeled IVF. Inside were years of receipts, insurance statements, and credit card bills. I spread them across the desk, a paper trail of my desperation. The clinic fees, the medication costs that insurance barely touched, the consultations, the procedures. I pulled out a calculator and started adding them up, my hands shaking slightly. The final number stared back at me from the small screen: $73,428. $73,000. All of it paid for out of my own savings from the money my father had left me, and in the last year from credit cards. I had never once asked my mother for help. I knew she wouldn't have offered it. To her, my struggle was a private, slightly embarrassing failure, not a family crisis that required a united front. But Savannah's desire for an ice sculptor, that was a family responsibility. I leaned back in my chair, the injustice of it all washing over me. I had been used and discarded my entire life, my needs always secondary to Savannah's wants and my mother's ambitions. My grief was an inconvenience, my financial strain was my problem, my inheritance was their solution. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. Eliana answered on the second ring. Andrea, I was just thinking about you. How are you doing? For real. Eliana and I had been roommates in college. She was now a sharp, no nonsense lawyer in the city, and one of the few people who knew the full extent of my family's dynamics. I didn't have to pretend with her. The dam broke. I told her everything: the miscarriage, the empty nursery, my mother's cruel words, the wedding budget, the public pressure campaign. I told her about the $73,000 I'd spent trying to build a family and how they now expected me to hand over my last asset to fund a party. She listened patiently, letting me vent until I ran out of words. When I was done, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Okay, she finally said, her voice calm and measured. First of all, your mother is a monster. I just want to validate that for you. A small, watery laugh escaped me. Thanks, Eli. Second, she continued, you know you don't have to do this, right? You don't owe them anything. I know, but she's telling everyone. If I say no now, I'm the villain who ruined my sister's wedding right after losing a baby. They'll say I'm bitter and jealous. Let them, Eliana said firmly. But I hear you. You don't want the drama. You just want it to stop. She paused for a moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her legal mind. You know, there's another way. A silent form of protest, you could call it. What do you mean? You agreed to give the land away, right? As a gift. You never specified who you were giving it to, she said, a hint of mischief in her voice. What if you still give it away? Just not to them. The idea hung in the air between us, radical and terrifying. It was a level of defiance I had never even considered. You could donate it, Eliana said, her voice gaining momentum, to a charity, a nonprofit. You'd get a massive tax write-off, and you'd be fulfilling your promise to gift the land. You'd just be giving it to someone who actually deserves it. I thought of the photograph on my bookshelf, my grandmother smiling, raising money for Haven House. Her words echoed in my mind. Something meaningful, a safe haven. A thrill, the first positive emotion I'd felt in weeks, shot through me. It wasn't just protest, it was purpose. It was honoring my grandmother's legacy instead of letting my mother and sister auction it off for party favors. That night, after I hung up with Eliana, I sat at my computer for hours. The anger that had been simmering inside me finally had a direction. I didn't type land appraisers or real estate agents into the search bar. Instead, I Googled women's shelters plus land donations. The first result that popped up was a local organization, a name I recognized instantly: Haven House. The bridal shower was held 2 weeks later at my mother's house. The backyard, with its pristine landscaping and perfectly manicured rose bushes, was filled with about 50 women in pastel dresses, sipping champagne and making small talk. I was in my designated role as maid of honor, which apparently meant I was also the unpaid catering staff. Andrea, could you be a dear and grab another bottle of Prosecco? My mother chirped, gliding past me with a tray of canapes. I smiled tightly and headed back to the kitchen. For the past hour, I'd been refilling glasses, passing out napkins, and fielding sympathetic but probing questions about my situation. Each time, I gave the polite, rehearsed answer my mother had coached me on. It's been difficult, but focusing on Savannah's happiness has been a wonderful distraction. When I returned with the wine, Savannah was in the middle of opening her mountain of gifts. She held up a set of ridiculously expensive crystal wine glasses, feigning surprise. Oh, you shouldn't have, she gushed, placing it on a table already overflowing with designer kitchenware and luxury linens. I stood in the back, a silent observer, watching the performance. My mother stood beside Savannah's chair, beaming like a pageant mom whose daughter had just won the crown. After the last gift was unwrapped, Peyton tapped a glass with her fork to get everyone's attention. I just want to thank you all for coming to celebrate my beautiful Savannah, she began, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity. As you know, family is the most important thing to us. It's about being there for each other, in good times and in bad. She paused, placing a hand on Savannah's shoulder and looking directly at me. And in that spirit, I want to share some wonderful news. As her maid of honor gift, Andrea is doing something truly extraordinary. She is gifting Savannah the family land our mother left her to ensure that she and Wyatt can build their dream home and start their lives on the strongest possible foundation. A collective gasp of admiration rippled through the crowd. Women turned to look at me, their eyes wide with impressed approval. I felt my cheeks flush, but I held my mother's gaze and gave a small, serene smile. Inside, my heart was pounding with a cold, calculated rhythm. Let them think what they want. The public narrative she was building would only make my own reveal more impactful. The next morning, I drove to a small, unassuming office building downtown. The sign on the door read, Haven House Community Outreach. The anger from the shower had settled into a quiet resolve. I was no longer just protesting, I was building something. The woman who greeted me was named Willow Gonzalez. She was in her mid 30s with warm, intelligent eyes and a calm, capable demeanor. She led me into a small, cluttered office filled with filing cabinets and children's drawings taped to the walls. Thank you for coming in, Andrea, she said, gesturing for me to sit. Your email was, well, it was the answer to a prayer we didn't even know we could make. I explained the situation, leaving out the more sordid family details. I told her about the 5 acres of land my grandmother had left me and that I wanted to donate it, no strings attached. Willow listened intently, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to genuine hope. We've been trying to secure a second location for years, she explained. Our current shelter is always at capacity. We have to turn women away every single night. A plot of land that size, we could build transitional housing. Small, independent units where families can stay for up to 2 years, get back on their feet, and rebuild their lives in a stable environment. As she spoke, the door to her office creaked open, and two small children, a boy and a girl, no older than 5 or 6, peeked in. Mommy, is it time for lunch? The little girl whispered. Willow's face softened instantly. Almost, sweetie. Give me 5 more minutes. She turned back to me, a small, apologetic smile on her face. My kids. They're here with me today. The reason I do this work. She watched them run back down the hall, and for a moment her professional guard dropped. I saw the fierce, protective love in her eyes, the same love I had felt for the child I never got to meet. In that instant, I knew with absolute certainty that this was the right thing to do. This was the family the land was meant for. There is one potential issue, I said, remembering the pristine neighborhood bordering the property. My parents' community. They might complain about a shelter being built next door. Willow nodded, her expression turning serious. We've faced that before. NIMBYism, not in my backyard. It can tie things up in zoning battles for years. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach, but then Eliana's legal advice came back to me. My friend, she's a lawyer. She looked into the deed. I explained. There's an old easement agreement on the property. Something about guaranteeing public access for community benefit. She said it's an ironclad clause that gives projects serving the public interest legal priority over aesthetic complaints from neighbors. Willow's eyes widened. Are you serious? That's a game changer. My grandmother was smart, I said, a real smile touching my lips for the first time in weeks. Before I left, Willow handed me a folder with the preliminary donation paperwork. It was a simple declaration of intent, the first legal step. The final deed transfer would happen later, but this would get the ball rolling with their board and grant writers. I took the pen she offered, my hand steady. As I signed my name on the dotted line, I felt a profound sense of peace. I was no longer just reacting to my family's cruelty. I was creating something new in its place, something that would last long after the memory of Savannah's designer wedding flowers had faded. The rehearsal dinner was held at an exclusive country club with sweeping views of a golf course. The air was thick with the scent of money and expensive perfume. I moved through the evening in a calm, detached haze, smiling at relatives and making polite conversation. My performance as the supportive sister was flawless. Savannah was in her element, flitting from table to table, her laughter loud and performative. My mother trailed in her wake, soaking in the reflected glory. I noticed Wyatt, Savannah's fiance, watching me a few times from across the room. He was a passive man, content to be led by Savannah's ambitions, but he wasn't stupid. He caught my eye as I was getting a glass of water from the bar. You seem calm, he said, his tone a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. It's a happy occasion, I replied smoothly. Yeah, but I don't know. After everything, I guess I expected you to be more upset. Bitter, maybe. He said it without malice, a simple observation. He saw my grief as a potential threat to the wedding's perfect facade. Grief is complicated, I said, giving him a small, enigmatic smile before walking away. Let him think I was bitter. It was better than him knowing I was plotting. Later in the evening, as dessert was being served, I felt a light touch on my arm. I turned to see my Aunt Victoria, my mother's older sister. At 60, she had a kind, weary face and none of Peyton's sharp, polished edges. She was the family outcast, the one who'd refused to play my mother's games years ago and had been quietly ostracized for it. We rarely saw her, but she'd been invited to the wedding out of a sense of obligation. Walk with me, Andrea, she murmured, her eyes darting toward my mother, who was deep in conversation with Wyatt's parents. We stepped out onto the terrace, the cool night air a welcome relief. We stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the perfectly manicured landscape. I heard what you're supposedly doing with your grandmother's land, Victoria said, her voice low. I also know my sister. This wasn't your idea. I didn't answer, just stared out into the darkness. Your grandmother would be horrified, she continued, her voice laced with a familiar sadness. She left you that land for a reason. She was trying to protect you. Just like your father was. The mention of my dad, who had passed away over a decade ago, sent a jolt through me. What do you mean? Victoria sighed, leaning against the stone balustrade. Your father, Dwayne, he wasn't a strong man when it came to Peyton. She could always manipulate him, but he loved you girls. He saw the way things were, even if he didn't have the spine to stop it. She turned to face me, her expression serious. A few months before he died, he tried to revise his will. His original will left everything to be split equally between you and Savannah, but Peyton got in his ear. She convinced him that Savannah, being younger, would need more of a head start, that you were the responsible one and could make your own way. My blood ran cold. I'd always been told my father's will had favored Savannah, and I'd accepted it as just another example of the family hierarchy. He was sick then, not thinking clearly, Victoria said, her voice tinged with anger. Peyton had her lawyer draw up a new version, one that left the bulk of the estate to Savannah. She even tried to contest his original will after he passed, claiming he was of unsound mind when he wrote it, but she didn't have a leg to stand on. It all clicked into place. The years of financial disparity, the casual expectation that I would always be the one to sacrifice. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a calculated long term strategy. Your grandmother saw what was happening, Victoria said softly. She knew Peyton would find a way to take whatever your father left you, so she bypassed him, bypassed everyone, and left you the land directly. It was her way of making sure you had something that Peyton couldn't touch. A safeguard. I felt dizzy, the carefully constructed image of my family cracking apart. It wasn't just that they were selfish, they were predatory. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out a small, sleek thumb drive. Because your father was a better man than Peyton allowed him to be, and because I'm tired of watching her win. She pressed the drive into my palm, her fingers closing around mine. A few years ago, I was helping my husband clear out some old office equipment. He used to do some IT work for your father's lawyer. He found a folder of audio files on an old hard drive, backups the lawyer had made. They're recordings of the phone calls between Peyton and the lawyer while they were drafting that second will. It's all there, Andrea. Her manipulating him, coaching him on what to say, dismissing his concerns about you. My hand tightened around the small piece of plastic. It felt heavy, like a weapon. I don't know what you're planning, Victoria said, her eyes meeting mine in the dim light. But whatever it is, your grandmother would be proud of you for fighting back. Just be smart about it. She squeezed my hand one last time before turning and heading back inside, leaving me alone on the terrace with a decade-old secret and the tools to burn it all to the ground. The wedding day arrived, a picture-perfect Saturday in early June. I played my part with an Oscar-worthy performance. I helped Savannah into her custom gown, a monstrosity of lace and tulle that cost more than my car. I adjusted her veil, fluffed her train, and told her she looked beautiful. And she did, in the way a perfectly crafted doll looks beautiful, flawless, expensive, and empty. The venue was a historic estate with sprawling gardens and a grand ballroom, every detail meticulously curated to scream wealth and status. 200 guests, a sea of designer suits and cocktail dresses, watched as my sister glided down the aisle on the arm of a distant uncle. I stood at the altar in my dusty rose bridesmaid dress, a serene smile plastered on my face, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. The ceremony was a blur of empty platitudes and rehearsed vows. I watched Wyatt slip the diamond ring on Savannah's finger, his expression placid and untroubled. He had no idea the foundation of his new life was a lie built on my grief. At the reception, the opulence was dialed up to an almost comical level. The artisanal ice sculptor had carved a swan. The Dove release coordinator was prepping his birds for their grand finale. My mother was in her glory, holding court near the head table, accepting congratulations as if she were the one who had just gotten married. I endured the dinner, the clinking glasses, the endless small talk. I watched my sister laugh and preen, the center of a universe she believed revolved entirely around her. Finally, the time came for the speeches. The best man gave a generic, rambling toast. Then it was my turn. I walked to the microphone, a single piece of paper in my hand. The room quieted. I saw my mother give me a small, encouraging nod, confident I was about to deliver a heartfelt tribute that would further cement her narrative of our perfect, selfless family. Good evening, everyone, I began, my voice clear and steady. For those who don't know me, I'm Andrea, Savannah's older sister and maid of honor. I smiled at Savannah, a genuine smile this time, though not for the reason she thought. Savannah, from the time we were little, you've always known exactly what you wanted. And you've always had a unique talent for getting it. A few polite chuckles rippled through the room. Family, as we all know, is about putting each other first, I continued, my eyes finding my mother's in the crowd. It's about making sacrifices for the ones you love to help them build their dreams. Peyton's smile widened. This was going exactly as she'd planned. In that spirit, I have a gift for you, Savannah, my maid of honor gift, the one you've been waiting for. I stepped away from the microphone and walked toward the head table. From the chair where I'd left my purse, I picked up a large, glossy white folder identical to the one Savannah had sent me, tied with the same dusty rose ribbon. I walked back to the small stage and handed it to her. Her face lit up. "Oh, Andy, you didn't have to do this in front of everyone," she said, her voice a pitch-perfect blend of feigned modesty and excitement. "Open it," I said quietly. With a flourish, she pulled the ribbon and opened the folder. The guests craned their necks, expecting to see a symbolic deed or a giant check. But Savannah's smile faltered, her brow furrowed in confusion. She pulled out the top document. It wasn't a property deed made out to her and Wyatt. It was a legally executed, notarized, and filed property deed of donation. The recipient, in bold letters at the top of the page, was Haven House Women's Shelter. A confused murmur spread through the room. Savannah stared at the paper, her mouth slightly agape. She looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. What is this? It's the land, Savannah, I said, my voice just loud enough for the microphone to pick up. I gave it away, just like I promised. Before she could process it, the large double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Willow Gonzalez walked in. She wasn't alone. With her were two other women, their faces etched with a quiet strength that spoke of hardships I couldn't imagine, and behind them a man with a professional video camera resting on his shoulder, its red recording light glowing brightly. Willow walked calmly to the front of the room, stopping a few feet from the stage. She looked not at me, but at the stunned guests. "Good evening," she said, her voice resonating with a calm authority that commanded attention. "My name is Willow Gonzalez, and I'm the director of Haven House. On behalf of the families we serve, I want to offer my deepest, most profound thanks to Andrea Wright for her life-changing donation." Peyton's gasp was audible from across the room. Wyatt's mother, a formidable woman draped in pearls, leaned over to her husband and whispered, her voice carrying in the sudden, shocked silence, "This is a scandal." The shocked silence in the ballroom lasted for a full 10 seconds before it shattered. Savannah finally found her voice, a high pitched shriek of pure rage. "You did what?" she screamed, her perfectly made up face contorting into an ugly mask. "You ruined my wedding." My mother was on her feet, her face pale with fury. "Andrea, what is the meaning of this? You will fix this right now." She started toward the stage, her hands clenched into fists. But Willow was prepared. Two uniformed security guards, hired by Haven House for this exact possibility, stepped forward, flanking the stage and creating a calm, immovable barrier. The cameraman never flinched, keeping the lens trained on the unfolding chaos at the head table. "This is a private event," Peyton hissed at one of the guards. "We were invited guests of the donor," Willow stated calmly, holding up a copy of the donation acceptance letter. The murmuring among the guests grew louder. Phones were coming out, discreetly at first, then more openly. The live stream to the shelter's donor page was capturing everything. Savannah's tantrum, my mother's impotent fury, the stunned disbelief on the faces of Wyatt's wealthy family. I didn't say another word. My part was done. I gave Willow a small, grateful nod, and she nodded back. As my family imploded in a spectacle of their own making, I calmly walked off the stage, past the bewildered guests, and out of the ballroom. Willow and her small entourage followed me out, leaving the firestorm to burn itself out. By the next morning, it was more than a scandal. It was a story. The video, expertly edited and packaged with a heartfelt message from Willow, had gone viral. It wasn't just a clip of a wedding reception gone wrong, it was the story of a woman honoring her grandmother's legacy by donating land to a shelter, juxtaposed with the entitled rage of the family who wanted to sell it for a party. Public support for Haven House exploded. Donations poured in. Local news stations picked up the story, framing it as an inspiring tale of philanthropy. They interviewed Willow, who spoke eloquently about the desperate need for transitional housing for victims of domestic abuse and the importance of maternal health access for vulnerable women. My name was mentioned only as the generous donor. My family's behavior, however, was the undeniable, ugly subtext of every report. I spent the day with my phone turned off, ignoring the flood of texts and voicemails I knew were waiting for me. That evening, I drove out to the land. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the meadow. I walked to the small hilltop that overlooked the property, the same spot where my grandmother and I used to sit. From here, I could see the back of my parents' house, its large picture windows dark. The entire neighborhood was quiet. I wondered what they were all thinking, what Mrs. Gable was saying now. A white truck pulled up the access road and parked. A man in his mid-30s with a friendly, capable look about him got out. It was Maximus Richards, the contractor Eliana had recommended, who had agreed to lead the construction pro bono. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, walking over. "Just wanted to do a final survey before we break ground next week." He unrolled a set of blueprints, and we looked them over together. He pointed out where the small cottages would be, the community garden, the playground. It was more beautiful than I could have imagined. "All the initial zoning and permit fees have been cleared," he said, tapping a section of the plans. "That LLC you set up really streamlined the process. Smart move." I smiled. A few weeks ago, Eliana had helped me establish a temporary LLC to handle the preliminary legal work. It kept my name off the public filings until the last possible moment, preventing my mother from discovering my plan. I'd funded it with the last of the money from my father's inheritance, the portion Peyton hadn't managed to steer towards Savannah, and I had named the LLC with a quiet act of defiance and love. What does Dwayne's Meadow stand for anyway? Maximus asked, glancing at the name on the paperwork. It was my father's name, I said softly, a lump forming in my throat. He would have liked this. Maximus's team arrived a few minutes later and began driving stakes into the ground, marking the construction zones with bright orange tape. The layout was clear now. The main building and the family cottages would sit directly across the fence line from my parents' perfectly manicured backyard. Every morning when they looked out their kitchen window, they would see the tangible result of their greed. They would see the safe haven that had been built from the ashes of their daughter's grief. They hadn't just lost a piece of land, they had gained a permanent daily reminder of what they had thrown away. The fallout was swift and brutal. In a community built on image and reputation, the viral video was a social death sentence. My mother, who thrived on the admiration of her neighbors, found herself suddenly ostracized. The friends who had once praised her daughter's selfless gift now crossed the street to avoid her. The invitations to garden parties and charity luncheons stopped coming. She was no longer the matriarch of a prominent family. She was the mother from that awful video. For Savannah, the consequences were even more direct. Wyatt's family, mortified by the scandal and disgusted by her behavior, closed ranks around their son. The pressure was immense. A week after the wedding, I heard through Aunt Victoria that Wyatt had filed for an annulment, citing fraud. He claimed he had entered the marriage under the false pretense of a stable, supportive family. Savannah's dream of marrying into wealth and status had evaporated before the thank you cards were even sent. She moved back into my mother's house, the two of them trapped together in a prison of their own making, with a front row seat to my quiet victory. I never released the audio files Victoria gave me. I didn't need to. My mother's public humiliation was a far more fitting punishment than a legal battle over a long dead man's will. The recordings remain on that thumb drive, tucked away in a safe deposit box, a final, unspoken piece of insurance I hope I never have to use. A few weeks after the wedding, as the first foundations were being poured on the land, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was from Willow. Inside, there was no long letter, just a single sheet of high quality paper with a beautiful, professional letterhead. It was a copy of the official grant approval from a major national foundation, a multi-million-dollar grant that would fully fund the construction and operation of the new facility for its first 5 years. The public momentum from the wedding video had pushed their application over the top. At the bottom of the page, Willow had handwritten a short note. The board has unanimously voted on the official name for the new campus. We hope you approve. It will be called the Marigold House in honor of your grandmother's garden and her lifelong support of our mission. Thank you for helping us grow something beautiful, Andrea. Tears welled in my eyes as I read the words. Marigolds had been my grandmother's favorite flower. She said they were resilient, that they could grow anywhere, even in the poorest soil. She said they represented the power of turning grief into something bright and beautiful. The construction moved quickly through the summer and into the fall. I visited the site often, watching the cottages take shape, the playground equipment being installed, the community garden being tilled. I never saw my mother or sister, but I knew they were watching. I could feel their eyes on me from behind the pristine windows of their house. On a crisp autumn afternoon, just before the grand opening, Willow invited me to walk the grounds with her. The cottages were finished, each with a small front porch and a pot of bright orange marigolds by the door. The air was filled with the smell of fresh paint and possibility. I had brought a small paper bag with me. As we stood near the foundation of the main community building, I reached inside and pulled out a handful of dried flower petals I'd saved from my own garden. They were the descendants of the marigolds my grandmother had first planted years ago. I let the wind catch them, scattering the bright orange and yellow flakes over the newly poured concrete. They settled into the cracks and crevices, a small, quiet blessing for the women and children who would soon call this place a temporary home. It wasn't the life I had once dreamed of, the one with a nursery and a swing set in my own backyard. The ache for the child I lost is still there, a quiet companion to my days. But standing there, watching the petals dance in the breeze, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Even if I never become a mother, at least I gave birth to something that mattered.